Hello, everyone, and welcome to the best episode of the year on the Future Projection and Baseball America podcast feeds. I am Ben Badler, and it is the best episode of the year because I get to sit here and pepper my friends Carlos Collazo and JJ Cooper with questions about what's coming up on the draft, what exactly is going to happen, maybe not 30 for 30 on the mock draft this year, but we're expecting at least
high bar
20 correct from Carlos. You have your suit picked out for the draft show. You got your wardrobe good, Carlos?
Yeah, I do have my suit picked out. I need to actually get some beard trimming taken care of and hopefully not look like I'm exhausted with zero sleep on draft day. But yeah, all that is kind of taken care of, and now we just need to figure out who's going where, and hopefully on this podcast we'll do that. And we got friend of the program and our boss JJ Cooper on. It's kind of a weird mix of hosts and podcasts, but it's going to be fun to break it down to you guys. What's up, JJ?
It's good to be with you guys. Thank you guys for inviting me on. Although, so we're going to do the joint pod here. We'll go out on the draft pod feed as well, because we're going to be talking about every team and what we think they're going to do. I can't imagine a better way to spend, I would say an hour, but probably more like a couple of hours.
Yeah, I think more of the latter is probably correct. So I think we should get started. We're going to run through every team's top picks today. I'm not going to do all top 10 rounds. We'll save that for the next episode with me and Carlos. But we're going to start with the Chicago White Sox at number one. So pretty much every mock draft since we knew the Chicago White Sox were going to be picking first overall since they won the draft lottery. Carlos, we've had them taking Rock Chalowski. It was a strong season for Rock Chalowski. It wasn't the greatest finish for his season and certainly for his team with UCLA. Yeah. But it now seems like, I don't know, is it a little bit more crowded? Is there a real decision that the White Sox have on their hands between Rock Chalowski, Grady Emerson, the high school shortstop from Texas, Von Lackey, who had a spectacular year, catcher for Georgia Tech? Mm-hmm. Do you think the White Sox are really debating between these three players still? Do you think they have their guy picked out? What do you think is going to happen here?
Yeah, I looked back at our way too early mock that we do right after last year's draft, and I was pretty sure we had Rock Chalowski. We had him one, and we actually had the White Sox listed as the team there. As everyone knows, we have a draft lottery now, and so the fact that they were listed as the team is also a bit unusual. But I think every single actual iteration of our mock draft, preseason mocks, in-season mocks, every single one this year, we've had Rock Chalowski in the number one spot. I still feel like he's the favorite, although it really does seem like Grady Emerson in particular is a real candidate to be an option. I've heard whispers dating back for weeks and months now that he was seriously in play. I've talked with teams who do think the gap between Rock Chalowski and Grady Emerson is narrower than it was expected to be entering the year. I don't know. I would feel like I need a lot of information to come out to make me feel confident in putting Grady there. The way I would best describe it now as we sit here 6 days or so before the draft happens is Rock Chalowski being the pick seems like it would make a ton of sense. If Grady Emerson is the pick, I wouldn't be too surprised. If Von Lackey is the pick, I would be mildly surprised. And if anyone other than those three are the pick, I would be shocked. If that makes sense.
JJ, if you were the White Sox and you had the first overall pick, who would you take?
I think this is where what Carlos is saying makes a lot of sense from the standpoint of the reason that you would be maybe slightly surprised but not shocked if Grady Emerson goes 1-1 is you don't have to, if you're the White Sox, you don't have to think that Grady Emerson is clearly a level above Rock Chalowski to consider taking him 1-1. If you think that Rock Chalowski and Grady Emerson are 1 and 1A, and you struggle to go back and forth of which one you think is better, and then you say, okay, what are each of these two guys looking for? And you say, well, one of them is going to ask for, and again, I'm not privy to the negotiations, but let's say that Emerson's asking for significantly less money. Well, then you really do consider it, I think, because it does give you more flexibility later on. I would say that where this falls apart is if you think that Rock Chalowski's better than Grady Emerson, I think it becomes simple then, right? Like, yes, if it's something where you were going to get your 1A for half the price, but you're not going to get that. It's never going to be something like that. So don't try to save $1 million here and get a Henry Davis type at the top of the draft. If you can, you're never going to go wrong picking the guy who ends up being the better of the two, or you think is going to be better of the two.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think, it feels like we've talked about this so many times this year, but this is not a situation where you have this one guy who's really, really good and everyone else is kind of like, well, who knows what you're going to get. This is, I feel like that there are a lot of drafts that we've covered over the years where if Grady Emerson was the only guy in that tier, you wouldn't be saying, oh, this is a terrible draft. You'd be saying, this is exactly, this is what a 1-1 pick looks like.
Me and Ben,
go ahead.
Ben have talked about this throughout the spring. I do feel like if Grady Emerson was eligible a year ago, he would be the 1-1 favorite in that 2025 class. I think he would have been the best high school player in that class. He would have represented like a confidence and an offensive profile that a lot of the teams at the top last year didn't feel like they had. And I think that Von Lackey would also be in that conversation. I don't know if he would definitely be like the 1-1 favorite if you could just pluck his profile now and throw it into that class a year ago, but I think it'd certainly be in the conversation. I do think this top three group of players is really strong. The other element here to the Rock Chalowski, Grady Emerson, and like bonus leverage, signing bonus negotiations. I mentioned this in a mock draft previously, but they're repped by the same agency. So I do think there is a limit to playing these players against each other. Certainly, if one of those two players is more inclined to just get the biggest bonus possible, and one is like really excited about the possibility of being 1-1, you can satisfy both the players by maybe playing some of those games. Ultimately, the White Sox should take whoever they think is the best player. For me, I think that's Rock Chalowski. Ben, how about you?
I was going to say, so you can't just lie to Rock Chalowski's agent to say, oh, we got this for Grady Emerson.
Right. It's not going to pay off for you.
Yeah, I agree. I think I said when Grady Emerson was our number one high school player in the country when he was a sophomore that I thought he'd be the best, that he was just the best player in high school baseball, period, when he was that age. And he has only gotten better and better and better. Last year, yeah, I would have taken him 1-1 if he was in that same draft with Eli Willits and Ethan Holiday and your boy Seth Hernandez, Carlos, but he's that talented. At the same time, Rock Chalowski is too, and I wonder if there's a little bit of just like prospect fatigue with Rock Chalowski. Also, the idea, I don't buy the idea that, well, maybe Grady Emerson has a higher ceiling than Rock Chalowski because Grady Emerson is ahead of where Rock Chalowski was in high school. Yeah, and now Rock Chalowski is where he is now, which is a superstar college baseball player who's a shortstop who's going to be in the big leagues probably next year if you wanted to push him that quickly. Yeah, there's still some risk, obviously, with all of these players. But I love Grady Emerson. He'd be a great 1-1 pick in any other year. And if I'm picking second, I'd be thrilled to have him. He'd be my second overall pick. But I would still take Rock Chalowski. I think he's super talented, and he's going to get there even faster than Grady Emerson.
Yeah.
The thing I love that you've used in other discussions we've had where you've said, Carlos, that there's not this level of precision to this. This is something where all of this, there's ambiguity, there's error bars. I'll give you an example. That 2024 draft is a great draft now. We can already say the top of the 2024 draft is a great draft. If you're saying right now, okay, redraft it, line it up, I don't think that it's obvious even now sitting here a couple of years later where you're like, Bazana's in the All-Star game. Chase Burns is a stud. Nick Kurtz has been, a star. And you could throw J.J. Weatherholt in there. You've got Connor Griffin going 9. I think you'd probably take Connor Griffin 1-1 in that. But I could make cases for multiple players, even knowing what we know now about adding 2 years of pro track record. I could make debates for different players for that. There is an ambiguity that is necessary in this, which is there's just no way to feel like anyone who tells you that if they take Rock Chalowski that they were idiots, or if they took Grady Emerson, they're idiots or whatever right now, is ascribing a level of certainty to something that is so uncertain and does require a little bit of kind of almost like humbleness, humility to understand we won't know the answer to these questions for a decade or
Mhm.
more.
That's why we're going to wait a decade and then call everybody.
Yes,
idiots
then we're going to say you're an
afterwards
idiot.
once we know the outcome. It's a lot easier that way.
Right.
But what about, all right, so the Rays pick second overall. We're not accustomed to seeing the Rays pick this high in the draft. Carlos, are the Rays hoping for Rock Chalowski to slide to them at number 2? And if Rock goes number 1, does it seem like they're leaning more toward Grady Emerson or Von Lackey in this situation?
Yeah, I really am torn on whether or not, let's say Von Lackey does go 1, the surprise pick of that trio. From our perspective here, I would be very torn on who the Rays' preference would be between Rock Chalowski and Grady Emerson. If it's Grady Emerson and Von Lackey, I'm leaning towards Grady Emerson for the Rays. I just feel like I have heard them connected to Grady Emerson so consistently throughout the entirety of the spring. I've heard that they are extremely high on just the left-handed hitting high school shortstop demographic in general. I don't think it's relevant kind of what is going on in the organization right now as to what the Rays would prioritize from a position play, like a position standpoint. Like, would you rather have the shortstop or the catcher? People will point to, oh, there's good catchers in their system right now. I don't think that is really relevant. I would lean towards Grady Emerson if Von Lackey is the other option right now. But I think it's a similar conversation as to what we just had with the White Sox. And it might be a bit redundant for fans of teams of the first 3, but I generally do think that is the conversation we'll have. Of the top 3, I'm leaning Grady for them now. It just sounds like they really, really value his hit tool. And I just get the sense that the Rays like this demographic more than the Von Lackey profile, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, JJ, you cover the Rays for us for a lot of years doing their top 30. It does seem like they have not been an organization that has gone much into catching at the amateur level. I mean, maybe for Venezuelan catchers, but otherwise, not so much in
Or at
the
the
draft.
top of the draft in particular, yeah.
But also, we don't see them picking second overall and typically having access to a player like Von Lackey, who could be that franchise caliber shortstop. Do you see that organizational tendency holding true here still?
Yeah, so I would say, like, to Carlos's point, like, I don't think there's any way that you look at it and say, we got Nathan Filelli and Caden Bodine, so catcher is off the board. That doesn't make any sense. I would say, though, if you looked at and again, you don't want to go too overboard on institutional approach, because even though there's a lot of people who've been there a long time, even decision makers who've been there a long time may change some of their views and all this. But if you look over the last decade to 15 years, it's clear that the Rays do not value catchers the way that a lot of other organizations do. And I mean that not just they don't draft catchers at the top of the draft. I mean, as in, they come out of years where you're like, who's their catcher going to be? And then they're like, we'll figure it out. We'll piece it together. But there's never been an offseason where the Rays, who generally have had middling to poor catching, production over the last 15, 20 years. They obviously famously skipped. They did not take Buster Posey at the top of the draft. That's far enough back. I'm not using whether Tim Beckham versus Buster Posey has any indication on this year. But my point being, they're not a team that, obviously they don't spend a ton of money, but they've never been a team that went out and said, hey, this catcher is a really good, he's in the 3rd year. He's, still cost controlled. We're going to go get this stud catcher from a big league club. They're much more in this team's 3rd catcher might be able to do it for us kind of approach. And the flip side of that is they draft shortstops every year. They trade for shortstops every year. And even like when they draft a guy like Theo Gillen, they drafted a shortstop, immediately moved him to the outfield. Mm-hmm. But Theo Gillen, Daniel Pierce, Adrian Santana, Cooper Fleming, they are a team that is absolutely enamored, I would say, traditionally with the high school shortstop profile.
What's interesting with the Rays here with the second pick is you talk about them not being a big spender, and that is true. But at least in terms of the draft this year, they will be a big spender. They have the 2nd largest bonus pool. They also have a 2nd pick at number 33 overall. And maybe like how they're viewing this class impacting this pick is interesting. If they actually view it as a push between Von Lackey and Grady Emerson, they're really not torn in the room. I wonder what their perception of the talent available at 33, how that could impact the decision, if it does at all. I've heard them tied a lot to Taj Marchand, who is a high school shortstop, with the next pick specifically. If he makes it there, and he's on the board at 33. It's to the point now where I would be surprised if the Rays pass on him. They've been linked to him so heavily. Do they want to double down on the demographic? I think they easily could. That's a demographic most teams are happy to double down on. He's a right-handed hitter. I also think there are a couple other interesting college catching options that have a chance to be available at 33. Daniel Jackson might not get there, but he easily could. Jack Natilli, Carson Tinney. There are going to be options with both these demos with their next pick. And I would expect if the Rays don't go prep shortstop at number 2, there are going to be a ton of options for them with their next pick.
All right, the Twins pick 3rd overall.
Look, it's summertime. It's cool in the morning, hot during the day, cool again at night. Rarely am I sitting there going, oh, I'm just going to do one thing at a time. I'm bouncing from work. I'm bouncing in the yard. I'm running to a game. Fabletics has got me with price, comfort, and versatility with all the gear that I'm getting from them.
Yeah, we're talking about premium activewear you'd expect from higher end brands, but without the price tag. Lightweight, breathable, comfortable, built to actually last. And if you're going to Fabletics, you should be joining as a VIP, which completely changes the game. You can shop now at fabletics.com/foul to get 70 to 80% off everything when you sign up as a new VIP. Take a quick style quiz and be sure to select foul when prompted to unlock this offer. This is a limited time offer, so don't wait. Again, that's fabletics.com/FOUL for 70 to 80% off everything as a new VIP.
Is this just a matter of, okay, Rock Chalowski, Grady Emerson, Von Lackey, whoever's still available here, we're going to take that guy?
Yeah, I think that makes the most sense. I think that's the most likely scenario. Whichever of the 3 is available probably is going to be the pick. I hear a lot more just college profiles associated with Minnesota. That's not to say that, like, if there's a surprise in front of them and they pick between Vaughn and Grady, let's say, like, I've heard the Twins really like Grady Emerson as well. So I think he absolutely.
Like probably everybody does, yeah.
Right, exactly. Like,
That's good.
100%. But I wonder, kind of like speculatively here with the Twins, I wonder if they would be a potential like dark horse team for Drew Burress. I've heard for months now, they're like, hey, don't be shocked if Drew Burress goes higher than you think to a model-oriented team. The Twins would fit that description to me. So that one is kind of lurking in the back here. Maybe Jackson Flora as a possibility right here for 3, but I do think that's too early, just given the options the Twins are going to have. So in some ways, I mentioned this in the staff draft that we recently did earlier this week. You can see that in the video that Jacob and JJ and I did for that pick. But I just think that this in some ways is the easiest pick in the draft. You just take which of these top 3 players are available, because most teams we've talked to, and I guess obviously it depends, if the Twins have a completely different board, it doesn't matter. They should stick to their individual board. But from my perspective, it's just take which of these top 3 players are available.
Is there one, JJ, if you're the Twins, that you're, of those 3 options, that you're really hoping for gets to you?
Yeah, but I don't think Rock's getting there. You know, like I mean, it sounds funny, but like I know that they have Merrick Houston. I like Merrick Houston a lot. I know that we're talking about, like, again, White Sox fans, like, I don't know why we get Rocky Chalowski. We've got Colson Montgomery, as we say 1,000 times owner. Get shortstops. Shortstops can play anywhere. If your worst scenario is that you have Colson Montgomery and Rock Chalowski up the middle, and both of them are all-star caliber players, score. But I would say, if there's an organization that just does not have a shortstop right now, my apologies to Ryan Kreidler, my apologies to Tristan Gray. Rock Chalowski slides to the Twins at 3 somehow. The day he signs, he's probably their best combo shortstop. I'm not saying that he'll, be Nolan Shanuel and be in the big leagues in a month, but I would say, if they said, well, is he better defensively than the guys we have? The answer would be yes. Is he a better hitter than the guys we have? The answer would be yes. And that, again, Kalen Culpepper's there in AAA. I'm not saying, I think he's probably a plausible option to come up for them for the second half year, but Rock Chalowski is a better defender right now than Kalen Culpepper, even though Kalen Culpepper's made improvements. So yes, I think it would be like the dream scenario for the Twins. You can't say the same thing about, and Ryan Jeffers is getting, closer to free agency and all that, but you can't say the same thing about, this catcher is going to almost immediately leap to the big league level. I don't think it's crazy to think if they drafted Rock Chalowski, that you just write him in as their 2027 shortstop. And the question is does he get there before then?
Well, let's say the board goes as we have it ranked, which is Rock Chalowski 1, Grady Emerson 2, or some other, maybe Grady goes 1 and Rock goes 2, right? What would the Twins be getting if they take Von Lackey? Because we've had Rock and Grady toward the top of our list the entire year, right? Whereas Von Lackey, if you said, oh, there's somebody going 3rd overall from Georgia Tech, you would say, oh, probably
Drew Burress.
Drew Burress, right? No, like Von. Well, I guess you did mention Drew Burress earlier, but to me, that would be crazy to take Drew Burress at number 3. Whereas Von Lackey, I mean, it seems like you're getting a premium defender behind the plate at a premium position. I mean, if you disagree, tell me. A potential Gold Glove type guy if everything clicks. Oh, and this guy was a monster offensively this year.
Yeah, I think Von Lackey has changed his profile more significantly than any player on the board that we're going to talk about for at least the next 15, maybe 20 picks. He entered the year as a back of the first round talent because his defense and his athleticism and his contact skills were so exceptional. And I do think he entered the spring with Gold Glove caliber defensive potential in reviews. I think he's probably the best defensive catcher in this class. What changed with his profile is just he added more power, a significant degree of more power, to the point where in the first few weeks of the season, I was talking about, we had Drew Burress ranked inside the top 10. We had Von Lackey ranked behind him. We were talking to scouts hey, the best Georgia Tech player is not Drew Burress. It's Von Lackey at this stage. And the way I had it described to me from some people I was talking with was that the Twins have had a high-level decision maker at basically everything that Von Lackey did all spring. Guess that would also include Drew Burress, so that they should be pretty brushed up on that Georgia Tech team.
Jaron Avicula's covered also.
Exactly. But yeah, I think Von Lackey probably has the most value of all 3 of these players if we just completely miss on his hit and power projections, because we have seen players, Patrick Bailey is a player we've talked about in the past, who are just valuable big leaguers, even with an empty bat, if you can be an elite defensive catcher. And I do think he has that defensive upside.
Yeah, there's the piece that we did a couple weeks ago, the case for each of the top 3 for number 1. And one thing I did with that kind of jumped out to me is that we kind of remember the misses. Again, I brought up Henry Davis. There are I feel like that in my perception, I feel like that college catchers at the top of the draft is a very risky demographic. But one of the things that stood out is actually, if you look at it, they're actually one of the more successful demographics at the very top of the draft. I think partly that is that if you're a good defender, you end up being Joey Bart is not. Joey Bart's not a guy you want to take 2 overall in hindsight. However, Joey Bart is not the whiff it 2 like some other players are, because Joey Bart being a catcher is still going to end up playing 750, 1,000 games and probably end up with 3. You might even have one year where we look at it, it's oh, that's the year that we thought Joey Bart was going to have. You don't have that. If you miss on hit and power, that combo together is the hardest thing to evaluate with a position player by far. And if you miss with Lackey, you're still going to have a good player. Some of these other players we're talking about, if Drew Burress, if you miss on that, he's not anything you need to really talk about. He's Alex Call at that point. And that guy's a big leaguer, but that's not something where you go, woohoo, that's what we were looking for in the top 5.
Well, in a year where it seems like there is a big 3 at the top of our draft board, the Giants have the 4th overall pick. Carlos, is there any hope? Is there anything Buster Posey can do behind the scenes to get one of these? I mean, is there some chance that actually, they could get one of these 3 players between Chalowski, Grady Emerson, Von Lackey, or are they going to be picking between, Jackson Flora, Jacob Lombardi, Jay Booth, Drew Burke, somebody else?
Right. Likely. Yeah, I guess never say never. I mean, it's the draft. Crazier things have happened. I mean, we've seen players that we did not expect at the top of the board to go inside the top 3 range. So if someone unsurprising goes up top, or one of these players really plays hardball in the top 3 and a team flinches, and it's just we don't want to deal with it. Maybe. I still think it's very unlikely for that to happen. It sounds like the Giants really want Rock Chalowski to get to 4th, but I would want to pick Rock Chalowski if I'm picking 10th, but you're not going to get Rogers.
I'm sure whoever was picking fourth wanted Steven Strasburg and Bryce
Right.
Harper those years too. Yeah.
Right. I do just think in baseball's draft there is a limit to like the amount of control you can force on the board by wants and desires, and even acquiring extra picks in bonus pool. The Giants acquired the 29th overall pick from the Guardians. That added to their bonus pool. They now have one of the larger pools to work with, but ultimately that's not going to matter. The Rays and the White Sox have bigger pools and pick before them. So if it's a question of money, both those teams have the money and the pick capital to make it work. So I think the Giants are leaning bat. I've heard them connected to hitters more than anything. So I'd be really curious for a scenario where Jackson Flora is still on the board. Like, are they interested in him? They should be on talent. I would lean towards guys like Jacob Lombard, Eric Booth Jr. Those are the two names we've heard most associated with the Giants at this stage. We've been heavily in the Jacob Lombard camp. I believe Jacob Lombard, we have had him for the Giants in every single iteration of the mock as well. Like, we've had a lot of status quo in our mock draft throughout the spring. This might be the first one where I'm starting to lean otherwise. I think it might be Eric Booth Jr. I've heard his name associated with the Giants more in the last week or so. It feels hard to believe like that would be like a late switch in terms of like how they're viewing the contact skills of those players, but that is the biggest difference in the profiles. Eric Booth Jr. has really solid bat to ball skills to work with. Jacob Lombard's biggest question is the swing and miss. I think they are both really athletic, really toolsy, really high upside, premium position prep players. I think they're probably going to be the favorites here, but I'm fairly torn on which is their preference at this stage.
I like them taking Jacob Lombard, JJ, because then next year we get an infield for their low A team with Jacob Lombard, Luis Hernandez, and Joshua Gonzalez. Like, one of them, I don't know, they might have to throw one of them at first base or something for some games. But I think that would be exciting. But if you do you think? I mean, we have Jackson Flora fourth overall. It does seem, well, I'm not. Is it a reach to take one of the high school bats there, or is it more like, hey, Jackson Flora, these high school bats, and maybe throw some college bats into the mix too, is all kind of on the same tier of player?
So I want to point out, like, this is the part where I feel like I make Carlos bristle a little bit when I bring this up, but like, I do think there's a difference here. Like, we've got the White Sox and Rays at the top. And one of the things about this is we are now in a world where I do think you factor in how quickly players move, kind of where you are in your cycle a little bit with that. Not because you say, I want to make that the reason I make a pick, but if you're good and you add impact talent, if you add impact talent, and we are literally in a year where we are guys who are picked in 24 in the All-Star game in 26, multiple guys. Like, it's not crazy to say, okay, if I like these guys similarly, the college guy who I think could move really fast, or sometimes the high school guy like Connor Griffin move really fast, Kevin McGonigal, that there's some value in that. In the Giants case right now, I feel like that Jackson Flora, something that might be appealing about him to some teams is that he could be a reasonably fast mover. I don't think that helps the Giants a whole lot right now. I don't know where the Giants are in their, I feel like that they're in the bargaining stage of grief, of recognizing that they're probably, that this push has not worked and they're going to have to kind of retool. That's, to me, that adds to why you maybe want to take one of these high school guys if you think they're similarly talented, because yes, they're going to take probably a little bit longer to get there, but you're hoping for a bigger upside potentially. And the downside of, oh, this is a pick that won't really get there until 29, 28, 29, 30, depending on the development path, is not as troublesome when you're really not probably going to be contending next year.
All right. Well, sell me then on, you said, Carlos, EJ Booth potentially here ahead of Jacob Lombard. Sell me on EJ Booth ahead of Lombard, because when I see the two of them, I think they're both extremely tooled up players. They're both very explosive players. They're both very athletic players. They both run extremely well. They both have bat speed. They both hit the ball extremely hard. But when I see the two of them, I see Jacob Lombard having a chance to be a above average plus defender at shortstop. And there is more swing and miss there, more swing and miss than I would expect, just given his swing, because I think he actually has a better swing than Booth. Like with Booth, it's extremely high contact, but it's also a lot of balls slapped into the ground. Like he didn't go out and dominate the summer. Now, neither did Jacob Lombard last year either.
Yeah.
But I see with with Booth, somebody who's probably going to have to make some swing adjustments, and who also, as well as he runs, he's not built like your typical center fielder either. It's more of like a taller version, maybe, but like Jason Dominguez or maybe like Yohan Moncada, like that thick, strong, but again, extremely athletic and has the speed right now, certainly for center field. What for you think makes you say Booth potentially ahead of Lombard?
Yeah, I know you would be in the I'm taking Lombard camp. I'm in the I would take Eric Booth Jr. camp, and I think it really just comes down to my concerns about the contact skills with Jacob Lombard. I think part of me is a little bit concerned that the swing looks as good as it does. Like you said, I think aesthetically, mechanically, if you're saying like who has the more typical looking swing, Jacob Lombard's looks like how you would draw it up in some ways. And Eric Booth Jr. does have this kind of unusual handset. Like you said, he can get a little bit slappy. I don't know that he naturally pulls the ball into the air right now. He's long been talked about it as a guy who's going to need some swing changes or swing tweaks. I am less concerned with that element of his game, and I think he's already made some good progress this spring and just like smoothing out the swing. You also add the fact that Eric Booth Jr. is almost a full year younger than Jacob Lombard. He's a left-handed hitter. I do think Jacob Lombard is the more polished defender now. I think he's probably going to be a more impactful defender even in the long term. But at the same time, Eric Booth is an 80 grade runner. Maybe he slows down to a 70 grade runner at physical maturity because he doesn't have this like super long, lean frame to fill out. I still think he could be a really good defender in center field. And so for me, it's just the confidence in the contact skills, I think, would be the reason why I go in that direction. But again, like Jacob Lombard, he's a tremendous athlete. He has big league bloodlines. Like I do think there are some compelling reasons to believe that he could make the adjustments necessary to tap into more contact moving forward. At the same time, if you look at like his miss rates and who he stacks up with among recent high school players who have struggled, I think it's a more serious red flag for me personally than whatever Eric Booth Jr.'s red flag.
Kip, I've been looking for the best deals for the All-Star Game tickets in Philly. Where are you going to get some tickets from?
I'm going straight out to right field. If Harper and Schwarber both join the home run derby, I want to be catching the hometown guys hitting them. So I'm going out to the right field, kind of where I think I could get the best chance of catching one of those home runs.
Maybe in the second deck. You can go on the app and you can look to see what your view is going to be because them boys are going to be launching them, Jones. And with over 35 million downloads, SeatGeek is the #1 rated ticketing app. There's more than 70,000 events listed at SeatGeek, including concerts, sports, festivals, and more. And of course, I have a code for y'all. You can use the code Territory10 for 10% off your next set of MLB tickets at SeatGeek. That's 10% off MLB tickets with promo code Territory10. Make sure you click the link in the description to download the app and have the code automatically added to your account so you can use it later. Thank you to SeatGeek, and we'll see you at the game.
The Pittsburgh Pirates picking 5th overall. They also have the 34th overall pick in the draft. So last year, Seth Hernandez. The year before that, Connor Griffin. They've been all right. What do you think they're doing this year? Carlos, another high upside, high school play? Do they go a different route? I know they've had some staffing changes there, losing some of their key decision makers, but pretty good track record with their last couple picks.
Yeah, the Pirates have seemingly gotten a lot more quiet than most of the other teams inside the top 10. So I haven't heard any new chatter on them in recent days and weeks. But given everything you just said, it's hard to rule out profiles like Jacob Lombard or Eric Booth Jr. because they've had success with it. It's hard to rule out profiles that other teams perceive as too risky because they have been happy to take those profiles and they've benefited from it. So I do think like even at this stage of the board, this is where a name like Justin LeBron becomes really interesting. I think this is the highest realistic. I don't think it's the most likely, but I would hate to not mention it and then see it happen on draft day because I have heard him like in consideration here.
He did not have a very good season again.
No, he didn't. But we're going to talk about
again. I think it could be a first round pick.
Right.
So I don't want to like get it misconstrued, but for a guy who we did think potentially could go top 5 overall, did not have that kind of year this year.
He did not have that kind of year, and yet I've heard his name associated with basically all the teams picking from 5 to 10.
Wow.
In this range, like he could be a backup option for every team in this range. He's probably not the most likely option on the board until we get into the teens, but I do think his tool set and upside make him worth a conversation. The name I've heard most with the Pirates and the name we've mocked most to the Pirates is not a hitter. It's not a profile that's typically perceived as super risky in general. It is Jackson Flora. And I think this can make a lot of sense for the Pirates as well because they've done a great job getting a lot out of their pitching prospects. Jackson Flora has the most exciting upside potential, I think, in this pitching class overall. I don't think he has the sort of polish that a Cade Anderson did a year ago. I don't think he has the same command and control that his former teammate Tyler Bremner did at the same time, but he is more physical than Tyler Bremner. I think he has a more impactful maybe pair of breaking balls. His changeup has really come along. I think it's like a mid-rotation starter potential if the command continues to improve. The one question mark I have with Jackson Flora is people are going to look at his ERA and say, what are you talking about? But like, I feel like he should have dominated a bit more against his competition than he actually did. The strikeout rates that he had this year weren't as impressive as you would expect, and they don't really stack up with the strikeout rates of the top college pitchers who have come off the board in recent years. So that is kind of my one question, but he does seem to be the consensus top pitching prospect in the class. I think this is a very likely possibility for him at 5 to the Pirates. If he doesn't go here, it doesn't sound like he's going to last too much longer.
1.06 ERA, not good enough for Carlos. JJ threw a bunch of names out there. Do any of those guys jump out in particular as somebody you like for the Pirates, or just you like if you were taking that?
I do like Flora there. Like, I feel like you're getting the best pitcher in the class probably, or at least the guy who's, again, you could argue if you wanted some of these high school arms, that's a different, you're taking on a different level of risk if you take those guys compared to the guy who, for all of his flaws of missing bats, just does have, performed, has a track record of performance at the college level. I think with the Pirates, like, if you're sitting here, that's kind of like, I feel like again, there's no precision to this, but you are talking that you are picking here at the very back end of what we feel like is the top tier and the second tier. I would be concerned about dipping beyond that tier to, when I say that, what I mean by is we got the top 3 that feels like they're the top 3. And then it does feel like that there's another 3 that is the Lombard, Booth, Flora group. That's kind of your next 3. And after that, then it gets to where it's a lot more jumbled. I'm probably sitting here going, where I'm picking, I'm going to get a chance to have one of that second tier guys. The first tier is not getting to me. I'm going to try to pick from among that second tier.
The Pirates also have the 34th overall pick. Do you hear any rumblings of what they might do there, or a kind of strategy? Say they take 4, do you think they would complement it with a bat beyond that, Carlos?
I can actually see them being an org that would be fine doubling down on pitching. I don't know that they would be like, oh, we definitely have to take a hitter next. I also heard like a possibility of them trading this pick. So whether or not they even have this pick on draft day will be interesting. It is a pick they can trade. So that would be interesting if it actually happens. I think there are a number of high school hitters who could make sense. I mentioned Taj Marchand. I think Colt Prosek, if he gets there, would make a lot of sense. I think guys like Jensen Hirschkorn, right-handed pitcher out of California, he could be a possible fit for the Pirates in that comp round. It really any of our top high school pitchers, like the Logan Schmitz of the world. I haven't heard Coleman Borthwick specifically with the Pirates, but he would make a lot of sense on talent. Same thing with Carson Polemon. The Pirates do have the biggest bonus of any team in this year's draft. So whoever they're getting, it should be a heavy hitter with that next pick. If they keep the pick, I think they could do a lot of damage. Once you get into like 15 to 20 on the board, you have a highly, like a really talented player that gets there. The Pirates are already going to be in a position where, especially if you're a high school player with leverage, you could put out a really big number. And the Pirates might be one of the only teams who can afford it. So I do think whoever they get there, they're going to be a team to watch. Yeah, go ahead, JJ.
Can I ask one question? Why would the Pirates consider trading that pick?
I don't know. That's what I've heard though. So
no, I'm saying you haven't heard it. I'm just saying, like, to me, where the Pirates are right now, like the potential for the Pirates, who we just know are not going to go out there at the end of the season and go, okay, we've got 3 holes. you've got the biggest checkbook out here. We're going to sign the top guy. The trade return on those picks is not something where the Pirates are going to trade that pick and in return get someone where you're like, okay, well, I thought that the Pirates were on the fringe of the playoff race, but now it's a whole different story. With that being the case, it just seems you just rattled off a whole lot of names that if I'm a Pirates fan, I would be intrigued with getting there, knowing that it's not a safe bet, but to be able to take someone at the top of the draft here in that second tier and then get another kind of high upside from the group, from the area of this draft that we said is where the strength of the draft in a lot of ways is.
Well, one of the reasons why they might be more willing to do it is because last year they did not sign Angel Cervantes, so they have the 51st pick as well. So part of the reason why they had such a huge pool is they have this extra pick at 34 in the comp round. They have a supplemental pick at 51. They have their typical second round pick at 44. So if their thinking is, hey, there's a big league trade that would be meaningfully beneficial to our organization, and the 34th pick is kind of the sweetener that makes the deal happen, that can make a ton of sense. And you still probably feel like you can do some damage on draft day.
If that's for a player who's going to really impact them, I see the logic of that completely. If that's to be traded because really in the hindsight of it is we didn't expect to have this much money and we don't want to spend this much on the draft,
right?
I would be very opposed. Like, again, if you said,
I also think the hit rate of the 34th pick in the draft is so low that I'm always on team, hey, like you should trade your prospects for big league real value. I don't think the 34th pick in this draft is something that should be held so sacred that you can't possibly move it. I think there are any number of trades that could make a lot of sense, even if the Pirates, maybe you feel like you want to keep stockpiling talent. If you find a good trade, move it.
Again, my thing is usually when we see these trades the same way that, again, they have a higher price. They thankfully have a higher price than when you see a team trade, away international bonus pool allotment. It often feels like it's in a trade for a player who it's like, will be on the team for a month and a half, is in a up and down reliever role. If you're getting something real in return, I have no problem with it. But I would absolutely, if I'm the Pirates, I would not want to trade it for something that is this will be the sixth best reliever in our bullpen type guy. I would want it to be something more substantial than that. And yes, like the last year was Michael Oliveto, 34th pick. That was the Tigers guy who's been hurt this year. We'll see what he comes. Blake Burke the year before that, who is mashing, but we'll see how well he can hit. But again, it's something where that range, you're getting a lottery ticket, but you're getting a lottery ticket of some sort, and it's an extra lottery ticket when you have all those other picks there too.
The 6th overall pick this year belongs to the Kansas City Royals. They have 2 top 30 overall picks this year. They pick at 6. They pick at 30. Carlos, what are you hearing the Royals are going to do this year?
Yeah, Royals are weird. The Royals are the first team where you hear a lot of other options that are not in this kind of consensus group of 6. This is the first part of the board where if it's not a Jacob Lombard or an Eric Booth Jr., I maybe even think another player is more likely. A guy like Gio Rojas is associated with the Royals a ton. I know this is a team that's put a lot of work in on that pitching prospect in particular. He's the top-ranked high school pitcher in the class. This seems like his most likely realistic landing spot. I've also heard over the last few days that there's a possibility that there is maybe some ownership direction that hey, we want a quick moving player. The Royals have not played well at the big league level, whether it's ownership or front office, kind of dictating, hey, we want a quicker moving pick. Does that come into play and affect who the team is taking? I've heard the Royals associated with college pitchers like Liam Peterson and Mason Edwards. They feel like a little bit unlikely for pick number 6, just given the talent in this class and what those pitchers have done this year. The Royals also do pick again at pick number 30. Maybe they're hoping one or both of those guys gets to pick 27. They both feel like pitchers who are going to go in between their first 2 picks. But for me, high school seems like that might be the direction that the scouting staff in particular might want to go here. I've just heard they really like Jacob Lombard. I've heard they really like Gio Rojas.
JJ, the Royals have as we sit here today, the 2nd worst record in baseball. They do not strike me as a team that is just one fast-moving college player away from getting back to the playoffs.
I do feel like Rojas, there's a lot of logic to that. I'm not saying that that's necessarily where they're going to go, but if you look at Brian Bridges, who's their scouting director now, if you look at his history going back to the Braves, they had no problem with taking high school pitchers, and they did a pretty good job with it. And I do feel like, I know I've been talking about tiers and tiers and tiers and how the different tiers are here. I'll ask you, Carlos. I'll ask you, Ben. You guys were, following the prep class for longer than I have this year, more intensely. I feel like that if there's a guy that you could make an argument kind of fits close to that on the high school side, it would be Rojas. Like, you could make an argument. If you told me that some teams' boards had Rojas kind of in that same range as a Lombard and Booth, that would not shock me at all, I feel like.
Yeah, he's not too far off that range from us right now on the board. We've got him ranked right in the middle of the 10 to 20 range. I do think there's a bit of a tier break, but I don't think it's significant to where you could say, oh, we have him next on our board. That's crazy. Gio Rojas has been our top-ranked pitcher in this class or close to it. I know Carson Bowman actually entered the year right ahead of him, but he's been at the top or near the top for a long time in the high school pitching ranks, and he does have pretty electric arm speed. What are your thoughts on his just underclass track record, Ben?
Yeah, he's long been either number one, number two high school pitcher in the class for us. 6'4", left-handed pitcher, super easy delivery, up to 98 miles an hour. Throws a lot of strikes too. Has at least raw spin for feel for spin on the breaking ball. If I had to take a high school pitcher here or with any pick, I would love to have Gio Rojas. For me, any high school pitcher 6th overall who isn't like in that Seth Hernandez tier, and I don't think Gio Rojas is in that group. Seth Hernandez was throwing 100 miles an hour with a wipeout changeup and had feel to spin a breaking ball. Maybe not a refined breaking ball, but maybe comparable to Rojas, actually, now that I think about it. But I just don't think he's at that Seth Hernandez level. Not many are. I also would not be surprised if they ended up taking Gio Rojas here, because he does seem to fit a lot of traits and checks a lot of boxes that the Royals and their decision makers have gone for historically. So then after that, we have the Orioles picking 7th overall. Don't have a gazillion picks like they did last year. Carlos, what route are you hearing they might go with this pick?
If Jacob Lombard or Eric Booth Jr. are on the board, they feel like they're the favorites at this stage, just given how heavily associated the Orioles have been with both those players. If they both get there, I'm uncertain of which their preference would actually be. But I think both of them would be favorites. Beyond that, I hear a lot of college hitters. That is going to be a theme for a lot of the teams in this 7 to 13, 14 range, because I just think the college hitters are the best on the board. The one that's interesting to me that I don't fully buy is Jackson Flora. If Jackson Flora is on the board, with the Orioles either in this year think that the talent is worth it, or would this signal a shift in philosophy? The Orioles have not taken a pitcher in the draft inside the top 50 picks in Mike Elias's tenure with the team. I know Joseph Jurwa is doing well. He was picked, I believe, 4 picks after that, 58. 58. So if I'm them, you could maybe say, hey, clearly it works for us. We're getting good value on pitching, and we're not having to spend premium draft capital to do that. So I do think pitching, especially high school pitching, seems really unlikely here, but you at least have to wonder if Flora's on the board. Beyond that, and JJ, I'll let you chime in here. I think you're about to comment on the pitching, and I can get some other names.
I just want to say that, they did take Jurwa 58 last year. That was their 5th pick, and they took 9 picks in the top 154, and that was the only pitcher they took.
Right.
So I would say that last year didn't really signal, maybe this year will, but last year did not signal a significant change to their approach, that they are very much position player heavy at the top of the draft.
Right. And I do expect a bat here. I think other names like Ben's favorite, AJ Gracia, starts to become a real factor on the draft board. The Virginia outfielder, Chris Hakopian, Derek Curiel, another potential landing spot for Justin LeBron. I think Tyler Bell at Kentucky starts to pick up steam. I think Ryder Helfrich becomes interesting here. Drew Burress, who I don't think I even mentioned, this feels almost like getting close to his floor. So depending on how it goes, there are any number of hitting options that make sense. And I do think that once we start to get into that group of names I mentioned, it's very hard to separate them. The Orioles have taken extreme offensive profiles in the past. So whether that's just a willingness to take players with obvious flaws, whether they just want to get big tools and are happy with some of the variance that comes from the hitting ability there. It would make a lot of sense for them to take a Justin LeBron because of what they've done in the past, but take your pick of any number of those names. I think Drew Burress, Eric Booth Jr., and Jacob Lombard would be most likely.
So not really a type, I guess, other than probably hitter, because all those hitters you described are very, very different players. JJ, is there one that seems more of like an Orioles type vibe to you of these bats?
I'm just kind of imploring them to go away from one approach, which is the Orioles have probably spent more draft capital on college outfielders in the 2020s than any other team. I don't think it's probably very close. And it has not really worked for them that well. They've had a couple of guys who've become, Dylan Beavers has made it up there. He's kind of up and down. They've had, Colton Cowser, but they've been taking a ton of college outfielders at the top of the draft, I would say in the 2020s. And it just feels like that they've had more success in general when they've taken the infielders, when they've taken Adley was a catcher, but then they took the high school shortstops with Gunnar Henderson and Jackson Holliday. They took the college infielders with Jordan Westberg. I'm not saying even every one of those has worked out. They traded Connor Norby. They traded away in the college side Kyle Stowers, who's probably ended up being better than like a Heston Kierstad has been for them. But I would say if they're going on the position player side, I know that they still need outfielders. The fact that they still need outfielders after drafting this many outfielders over the last, to give an example, like they took Kierstad and Haskin in the top 40 picks in 20. They took Cowser 5th overall. They took Reed Trimble, John Rhodes, and Dante Williams with picks in the top 106 in 21. They took Dylan Beavers 33rd overall, Judd Fabian 67th overall in 22. They took Enrique Bradfield 17th, Mac Horvath 53rd, and Tavon Josenberger, who I kind of, to be honest, don't really remember much of after he was drafted, but at pick 100. And then they took Vance Honeycutt at 22. They took Austin Overn at 97 and 24. And then last year, they actually only took RJ Austin 93rd. That was the only college outfielder. But that's a lot of draft capital towards college outfielders. And there aren't a whole lot of those guys where you just say, they went out and then traded for Taylor Ward in the offseason because they've signed, Tyler O'Neill to a multi-year deal a couple of years ago. They still needed outfielders despite that. So I would say go in a different direction in my approach.
All right. I like AJ Gracia here, so I will disagree. No, I think you have that is not an inspiring track record that you just rattled off there for the college outfielders, but would not be surprised either if they ended up going back to that well either. But Carlos, the A's pick 8th overall this year. They have definitely leaned heavy into the college demographic in recent years with their top picks. Do you see it going the same route this year?
Yeah, I do feel like just unlikely that the top 3 high school players, any of them, get to this range. I view the Orioles as something of a floor for those profiles. And so I've not heard many high school players associated with them. I've heard a lot of college hitters. I've heard that the A's really want pitching. They could wind up in a scenario where there's just not a pitcher that makes sense to draft here. I don't view the A's as a team who would like force an arm here just because they want one. But if Jackson Flora gets all the way down to 8, that would be phenomenal value for them, I believe, and maybe it would line up with just a perceived need. Otherwise, it's a lot of college hitters. It's a lot of the same group of players I just mentioned. Drew Burress makes a ton of sense if he's available here. I've heard Tyler Bell associated with this pick. I don't hear high school arms. I haven't heard Gio Rojas's name much at all. So I'm inclined to lean towards just college demographic generally. But Tyler Bell starts to get a lot of action here. Derek Curiel, Ryder Helfrich, those are some of the names. Let's see if there's any other names I'm not mentioning here that I should. But
do you think Drew Burress could get to this pick, or would they go here?
I think so. I mean, we haven't talked about Drew Burress at a ton of different places in front of this pick before, right? Like I mentioned him pretty heavily with the Orioles. I mentioned him as like a dark horse, unlikely pick with the Twins at 3. The Royals, we had him mock to last time. I would come off that more compared to that mock. So Yeah, I do think like there's a decent chance, of course. If the Royals go someone not in our top 6, that leaves one of the high school players to the Orioles at 7, you're easily looking at a scenario where Drew Burress is on the board. So I think there are a number of different iterations where he could be available here for them.
Is he like how we're talking about it, though? Has he kind of separated himself? We said there's a lot of college outfielders that kind of start floating into this. Is he kind of are you hearing his name more kind of a little bit above the other group?
So here's how I would describe Drew Burress and his stock. I think he is generally in the group of names that includes Ryder Helfrich, Tyler Bell, Derek Curiel, Chris Akopian, and Ace Reese. And Chris Akopian and Ace Reese might have a little separation at the bottom. So let's just focus on Helfrich, Burress, Tyler Bell, Derek Curiel. Those names I'm all hearing as like the best of the rest after the top 6. And I do think Drew Burress has a little bit more ceiling and more chances to go off the board earlier because he grades out so well for analytically inclined model-heavy teams. There are a lot of model-heavy teams picking in the top 10. The track record of his performance is greater than all the players in that group. So I think there are just more positives for him at the high end. And so I feel like he's the least likely of that group to fall, if that makes sense. But I think they're all kind of in the same range.
Do you think it is probably college bat, JJ, or are there any of those college bats in particular that jump out for you?
I do think it's probably like looking back. You have to go back to Max Muncy. You have to go back to Tyler Soderstrom. The last time that the A's took a prep player in the first round. At the same time, the A's have a little bit more stability than most. It's the same player. It's a lot of the same people making those decisions now that were willing to take a Soderstrom not that long ago. And so from that standpoint, I think I don't want to say like, oh, they're clearly a doctrinaire. They only go this way. They have shown other approaches. But I also think it does, as Carlos laid out, we also kind of are talking about that the way the board lines up may kind of put them in that position too. Because if again, especially if Booth and Lombard are both off the board, the next high school guys, like it feels like there may be a group of college guys who are a little bit above them on most teams' boards.
Well, the Braves pick at number 9 overall. They also have the 26th overall pick this year. Feels like a pretty good year for the Braves on the farm. Eric Hartman blowing up. Tate South is seen doing well. John Hill, got a bunch of guys doing well in the minor leagues right now for the Braves. Carlos, what are you hearing on them at number 9?
This feels like the second most likely, or another hot landing spot, I should say, for Gio Rojas, our top high school pitcher, on the board. If he doesn't go to the Royals, this would be the next team I circled as a real possibility for him. Outside of Rojas, I've heard a lot of college hitters. Again, it's kind of that same group of names. Drew Burress would make a lot of sense. I've heard Chris Akopian and AJ Gracia in particular with the Braves. I think Justin LeBron again becomes a possibility here. And then further down, like I don't think that Cade Townsend fits at 9 for the Braves, but he could easily fit with their next pick. And I do think, just to highlight here, the Braves feel like one of the maybe 5 most likely or most willing orgs to take high school pitchers in general. Just traditionally, they've done that. Alex Anthopoulos, wherever he's been very adamant about stockpiling arms in the draft, and he's shown a willingness to do that with the Braves. Last year, they took 3 straight shortstops, excuse me. Does that indicate that the Braves are more likely to go hitter? I'm not too sure. I think you could maybe even say like some of the offensive seasons we've seen from the prospects on the farm, maybe make them be like, hey, like we've got some good breakouts. We can just take whoever we're most excited about. And if that's Rojas,
we'll just get another guy in the 20th round who will break out, Carlos.
Right, 100%. Yeah, you get 20th round hits. You're good. Yeah, so those are some of the names I'm hearing.
Any of those names in particular jump out for you, JJ, that you heard?
I would say, like you said, like Carlos said, the Braves, I have no idea whether they're going pitching or hitting, but the Braves are absolutely willing to belly up to the bar and say, we will take a prep arm, and where a lot of teams are especially averse at this point. I did want to ask Carlos with this, like you said, like it's too soon for Cade Townsend here. At the same time, is it plausible that is this a team that may try to get a little cute as far as like, can they push guys to later picks that maybe, or with where they're at?
It might still be like it might be the case where the Braves are a team that has underslotted their first pick and pushed some savings to later picks in a lot of their drafts. I don't know whether that's specifically because they want to push someone or it's just because like, hey, we like this player who's not a consensus player on the board at this range. We're going to take him anyways. Or it's like, hey, there's a group of 6 that it's hard to separate. We'll get the best deal we can. And we feel pretty good about our ability to create value with players later on the board that we can send some of that money to. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Braves just underslotted early because they've done that and they've had success doing that. And they do seem like one of these teams that are happy to spend some money on maybe some surprising profiles later in the draft. They've done this at the JUCO level. They've done this at the high school level. They really like two-way players, players with multi-sport backgrounds. So yeah, I think that could be a possibility for them.
Do you think they could go one of those college vets, or it could be a high school player early and then do an overslot for a high school player, or maybe it doesn't even have to be high school, or overslot for a high school player with that next pick, maybe looking at somebody like a Coleman Borthwick, a big power arm high school right-handed pitcher from Florida, or an Aiden Ruiz, a switch hitting shortstop, like you said, they just drafted a high school shortstop last year with their top pick last year in Tate South the scene. Do you see guys like that being in the mix there?
Yeah, I think they easily could. Like they were a team that I would throw out for like a Rocco Maniscalco maybe. I'm not sure like where his market's going to start to heat up. I would imagine it's around there. Maybe they could even wait a little bit longer for him, but with his combine showing, I don't know, maybe he's getting more buzz. I think any of the high school pitchers make a ton of sense just given what the Braves have done historically. If they could get a Logan Schmidt in that range, if they could get, again, Gio Rojas feels very unlikely to get to that range, but any high school pitcher not named Gio Rojas feels like a real possibility for them at 26, just given their extra picks, given how the board is likely to unfold before them. All of those could make sense. I would throw out names like Mason Edwards, Taylor Rabe, Tegan Coons on the college side, as well as Cade Townsend, who I previously mentioned as well.
Well, the Rockies picked 10th overall, and they got two more picks, I should say, in the top 40 overall. They picked 37th, 38th. Obviously, a lot of changes in that organization in the front office. Do you see them going college heavy? Obviously, that was something Paul DePodesta was heavy on in his previous tenure in baseball. Do you see them going that route again this year?
Yeah, they're kind of an interesting one. I have heard really college heavy for their first pick, a lot of college players associated with them. And then I've also heard them associated with a lot of high school pitching. My understanding of that is like we're looking at a team in the Rockies who pick at 37 and 38. They have some new decision makers in the front office, some of whom have been with teams who have been willing to take high school pitching. So maybe that just makes more sense for them to do a high school arm at 37 or 38. I haven't heard a high school arm heavily associated with 10 specifically. It's been a lot of college bats. It's been guys like Derek Curiel and Ryder Helfrich. Those are the two that I'm hearing most often. So Curiel at LSU as like this pure hitting center field profile, who I'm particularly bullish on, as listeners of the pod will know. Ryder Helfrich, I think this is kind of feels like the midpoint of his range, like 4 or 5 picks on either side of this. Feels like he should be off the board at some point. Just a ton of power, really good defense. I've heard some whispers of college arms. Cameron Flukie is a name I've heard. It sounds like Liam Peterson is a name who's been linked as well. Both of those feel a little bit more unlikely to me, just based on how the board could play out. But I at least want to mention them because I've heard them. Jared Greinlinger is a name that I've heard as well. I also get the sense that this would be kind of the top end of Jared Greinlinger's market. But those are kind of the names I've heard so far.
Can I just add that Derek Curiel, like this does feel to be like a pick that would fit for them. And I mean that partly because of what they've been bad at, right? Like with Curiel, you were talking about a surefire defender who can cover ground in the outfield. Maybe even for them. I mean, maybe like, hey, ideally you have an 80 in center. They don't right now, but if you have an 80 in center, you could put him in a corner even. But then also the power is going to play up a little bit. But more than that, big outfield, let him spray the ball all around, hit for average, get on base, run the bases. I kind of like, again, I know that Carlos is a bigger Derek Curiel believer than I am, but I kind of like the profile for a team that I feel like has really like where they need to zag from where they zigged before under the old regime is this is a team that did not draft up the middle players a whole lot. They drafted a whole lot of kind of corner power at the top of the draft. Not a lot of shortstops. I feel like this is a team that right now, if you said, what could they use? Let's go back to bringing in up the middle players with athleticism who can hit, and then developing the power down the road rather than taking the first baseman, which they did on multiple occasions at the first round. But the first baseman who you don't know if Toglia is going to have the power, things like that. They've got too many of those guys. They need more up the middle athletic guys.
Well, I think also they've drafted a lot of guys who had significant, and those questions have proven out in pro ball, questions about their contact rates, their swing decisions, and if you're going to go in opposite direction from that. Not that I think they're going to whatever we were doing wrong before, we have to do the opposite of that. But to make better decisions, we should draft some better pure hitters, some guys who have better feel for the strike zone. Derek Carrillo certainly fits that. I think AJ Gracia also at Virginia fits that. Probably, I would imagine a lot of teams probably have him a little bit lower on the board, but just in terms of that profile, I think he fits that as well. And then the Nationals picking 11th overall. First pick now for Paul Taboni, Carlos, and his time atop the Nationals organization. A lot of success with the Red Sox previously. What are you hearing the Nationals are going to do at number 11?
They're tied to a lot of hitters for me. Again, I think this is a possibility for Jared Grindlinger. Again, I think it's towards the higher end of his market. It does feel like Grindlinger is mentioned with almost every team that you would think of as a very model-heavy team. We'll continue to mention him with model-heavy teams. I do think the Nationals, if they haven't been viewed as a model-heavy team in the past, they certainly are viewed in that lens now. I think this feels like a bit of the floor for Drew Burress in some ways because of that. I think other college hitters like Ace Reese start to become more in play here. Chris Hakopian, you're going to start to have to deal with more college hitters who have flaws or positional questions that you're going to deal with. And some teams might even say, hey, we'd rather take the flaws of an Ace Reese or a Chris Hakopian because they give us such confidence about what they're going to do offensively. We'll leave the Derek Carrillo, lack of pop, or Tyler Bell, lack of physicality questions to other teams. We're happier with what they can do in the batter's box. So that's one that I've heard as well for the Nationals. I've not heard a lot of arms for them. It would be surprising to me if they did a high school pitcher. AJ Gracia is another name that would make a lot of sense here to me if he's on the board. Again, I don't know. AJ Gracia is difficult to get a feel for his range because I do hear him mentioned with teams this high, the Nationals, the Braves, the A's, and then you also hear like some whispers about him potentially sliding. So those are some of the names that I would think of.
Could I ask you with that? Like, to me, he fits that. What I interpret that to mean is he's the perfect kind of guy that if you want someone that you like, that you're maybe a little higher on than most, but that you can also do a little bit of a money saver on, as opposed to the other guys you're considering to push money to later on. It's logical that a player whose range kind of starts at here, but could go into the 20s should be more open to that idea than someone who Drew Burress is, like we said, his floor is probably around here, not the 20s.
Right. Yeah, that could make a lot of sense. I think so.
With Grindlinger, do you get the sense teams are viewing him more as a hitter now compared to a pitcher?
I think the teams who draft him are going to like him more because of his hitting ability. I would expect whoever drafts him to select him as a two-way player. I think that the model-heavy teams who really value age for hitters and contact rates for hitters are drawn to those two traits in particular. There are definitely some teams that I wouldn't think of as model-heavy that prefer him as a pitcher. That's not to say that, like, if you're model heavy, you definitely do prefer him as a hitter. And if you're traditional, you definitely do prefer him as a pitcher. I think there's still a healthy mix. But my sense is like the teams highest on him like him more as a hitter, even if they're like, hey, we're happy to have the ability to do both. And maybe I do think he is the type of two-way talent who will at least get an opportunity to try both to start his career, even if he quickly switches to one side or another, which tends to be the case for most of those guys.
I hope he gets the opportunity, if he wants to be a two-way player in pro ball, because this is 16, just turned 17-year-old player who, look, there's a lot of guys, this would be normally he would have been a 2027, right? And there's a lot of guys who in many cases we think are an infielder, and then they end up being a better pitcher going into that summer. And then by the end of the cycle, we say, oh no, actually maybe they're a better hitter or vice versa. And I think, look, he's a really talented hitter. I think he has the ability to go out and become a big league hitter, but also he's a left-handed pitcher who's up to like 95, 96 with a really good breaking ball, a really good changeup. The pitch ability is super advanced for his age. If I'm a team, I'm not saying, oh, we're going to throw out one of these. I'd love to draft him and put him out as a two-way player, especially because he could go out and look, if you like him enough as a hitter, it's not because, oh, we think he's, this, 70, 80 grade defender in center field. You think he's going to hit enough to be a corner outfielder. So you have the ability to just DH him on days where he's not pitching. But like you said, most teams don't tend to keep guys as two-way players, but I hope he at least gets that opportunity if he wants to. Angels at 12. They made a little bit of a change at the top this year. Carlos, do you think it's still going to be yet another college player? It seems like John Mozeliak said we're going to take the best player available, which is a pretty mundane quote to give that every team seems to say, and Angels fans seemed unusually fired up just to hear those words.
Well, I think that probably tells you a little bit about the Angels' strategy. Like, more than any team, it seems like the Angels have had a directive from ownership to take a specific profile of player. I mean, the most egregious example of this is looking like taking Christian Moore right in front of Connor Griffin, when like clearly part of the reason you're taking Christian Moore is you think he's going to be a fast-moving college player. He was a fast-moving college player. I don't know that nets you out with the best draft picks in the world. So hopefully that legitimately is what they do. Even before this news, I'd written about it in our previous mock drafts. I have heard the Angels associated with more high school players than we typically do. The last few years when they've been super college heavy, I've only heard college. This year, that's been different. Whether or not they go for a high school player, still, I'm like not super confident. Like, they're definitely taking high school now, and this move confirms it. I hope they're just more open to other profiles. But I've heard basically every demographic here for the Angels. I've heard college pitchers like Cameron Flukie, like Hunter Dietz, like Liam Peterson. This is another potential landing spot for Gio Rojas, who's the high school player I've heard most heavily associated with the Angels, who would absolutely not be a quick moving sort of profile. I've heard them to bats like Justin LeBron, bats like Trevor Condon, Ryder Helfrich, AJ Gracia. Like, I've heard them with so many profiles, and I do think this is the range on the board where that probably becomes more common for most teams. But don't be surprised, I would say, if they do go high school this year.
Based on everything you just said, I have the least amount of confidence that you're going to get the Angels right in your mock draft.
Right.
Because you just named about 75 players.
Yep. This is the reality of the mock from here on out, I will say.
I would just note, it's possible that last year was the start of this trend. And like when we look back on it, and I say this partly because here we are, it is July 6th as we're recording this, and Tyler Bremner is not a big leaguer, which kind of basically breaks the mold for the Angels as opposed to what they've done. And I mean, even like Ryan Johnson, where it was like, Ryan Johnson, you're straight to the big leagues. Oh, you're not ready. Okay, well, but this actually, their draft from last year looks pretty good right now. Chase Shores, Johnny Selinsky, CJ Gray, Nate Snead, like Luke LaCourse. There's guys here who haven't been bad yet, but also I would just note, they're on, I feel like in general, a little bit more of a normal developmental path. They're not like guys who are, okay, you signed yesterday, you're in Rocket City today, which they were doing for a while there. And it worked out for Zach Neto. And it's kind of the list of that. That may be the end of the list of the guys who was like, yep, that worked out great for them. So maybe they are like, even now they've obviously added a different decision maker at the top, obviously, as Mozeliak said, a lot of the people involved in these decisions are the same ones who were there when he was, before he was named the interim. But maybe this is going to be like, hey, all options are open, and the concern is not who can be up an hour after their sign, which would be good.
What about Cardinals? They have the next pick, 13th overall. They got a bunch of extra picks in this year's draft too. What do you see that doing in terms of their strategy when they're drafting this year, Carlos?
Well, I think that the Cardinals have been maybe tied to as many high school players as any team in this year's mock draft process, in part because they do have all those picks. Basically, any toolsy, high upside, exciting high school hitter gets associated to the Cardinals, whether that's because like they feel the need to scout all those players because they have so many picks, like they're just in play for basically every demographic outside of our top 6 players in the class. So maybe it's just because like, hey, the Cardinals have kind of had to go out and do the work because they have so many picks here. They have a really large bonus pool, a bigger bonus pool than any team picking in front of them, going up to the Pirates at 5. For this pick in particular, I've heard nothing but hitters. If it was a pitcher here, I would be surprised just based on how much I've heard hitting for them. At 13 overall, I think like Derek Curiel starts to become a real favorite for this pick if he's still on the board. Ryder Helfrich is a player I've heard associated with them pretty consistently. I think both of the top high school hitters in the class that we expect to be in play in this range, Trevor Condon and Jared Greinlinger, could make a lot of sense. Ace Reese and Chris Hakopian, AJ Gracia could also make sense. I get split feedback and a split like gut feel as to whether or not they would be interested in Justin LeBron. I personally don't see it with Justin LeBron. I feel like they would be a team who's not likely to take that risk on his hitting ability. They seem like a team that really covets and prizes command of the zone for their hitters historically. But I have heard them associated with him, so that one's kind of confusing to me. But yeah, I think if you want to dive into any of those, we can, but that's kind of what I'm hearing.
Does it seem like the high school guys would be especially appealing to them with some of their, not maybe their first pick, but especially those extra picks that they have coming up after that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one player in particular I've heard them really associated with is Luke Williams, who is a massive tool shed, great athlete, great runner, chance to be an impactful defender. He has raw power, and then there's real hit risk with him. Actually, another player that I've heard that has real hit risk who could be a fit for one of their later picks is not a high school player, but is a Ben Badler favorite. I wouldn't be surprised if Miles Bailey wound up being a St. Louis Cardinal based on some chatter that I've heard as well. I think Keon Johnson is another high school hitter that could be a fit for them. But yeah, I'm very excited to see what the Cardinals draft is going to look like because it would require a lot of off the board picks, I feel like, for me to not really like their draft class once we're done.
All right. What about the Marlins? Pick right after them. What's the latest buzz that you're hearing on what Miami is going to do this year?
Yeah, this is also very hitter heavy range. I've heard them associated with a lot of the hitters that the Cardinals are associated with. Derek Curiel, again, like this, because he's associated so much with the Cardinals and Marlins, this feels like something of a floor for Derek Curiel to the extent that we can put floors on players in the draft at this range. Ace Reese, Tyler Bell, Ryder Helfrich, all could make a lot of sense. AJ Gracia and Sawyer Stroh-Snyder, I've both heard mentioned. Yeah, don't hear a lot of arms specifically with this pick. I'm not sure if there's a bat I've not mentioned. I would think Condon and Jared Greinlinger are both also options here.
Seems like a lot of hitters also who are ranked a lot higher than, maybe not a lot higher, but higher than where the Marlins are picking this year.
Yes, but one of those players,
somebody's going to fall into their lap, and the Marlins
Justin LeBron. Yeah, I feel like since the Orioles, like I've been listing a lot of the same names. So maybe this gives you a sense for like the group, and we expect them to go somewhere in this order. But yeah, and this is also, I would say, like the challenge of the mock draft at this stage in general, and for this draft, is the teams themselves have very large groups of names, and so it's difficult to figure out like who their priority is, or even who they think is going to be available to them. And we're solidly in that mix here. One of the themes of this year's draft for people maybe who are just jumping into this pod to get ready before the draft is like the separation from number 10 or so to number 40 in this class is much more muddled than the typical draft, to the extent that like many teams have told us they're more excited to be picking a little bit later with multiple picks than to have like some of the separation that comes from picking at the top of that range, but not until much later, because it's very difficult to have the conviction, like JJ was talking about at the top of the show, of like who is actually the best talent.
So no, we haven't mentioned a lot of arms yet, right?
Yeah.
Like especially college arms. We've mentioned, I mean, Jackson Flora will be long gone by this range, but it does seem like if you're picking top 15. Doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of college arms that are going to be going off the board super early.
Yeah, I would expect the top 20 to be very hitter heavy. I mean, last year was pretty hitter heavy. I think, well, I say that we had a lot of good college pitchers at the top of the class last year. The college pitching demographic as a whole, I don't think performed as teams expected. Two of our top 3 college pitchers entering the year didn't have seasons teams wanted to see. It was kind of like Jackson Flora was the only guy who went out and improved. I do think there are guys like Mason Edwards, Taylor Rabe, Hunter Dietz, maybe the first 2 that I mentioned could sneak into this range, Tegan Coons. And I do think both Cameron Flukie and Liam Peterson have landing spots in the 10 to early 20s range, but they definitely start to pick up more steam in like the later teens. And then Gio Rojas is like the only high school name that gets mentioned in the top 15.
All right. The Diamondbacks pick after them. They have the 15th overall pick. They also pick again at 31 overall. Carlos, what do you think happens this year with the Diamondbacks? Are they taking another little left-handed contact bat? What are you seeing them do?
Yeah, because of their willingness or excitement about taking these left-handed hitting, smaller high school hitters with contact skills, I feel like it's impossible to rule out Trevor Condon. He would fit that profile to a T. I think Jared Grindlinger doesn't feel like the same as those guys, but he has some of the similar strengths. Chris Hakopian has great contact skills, maybe the best contact skills in the college class, unless you're going a little bit further off the board for like a Jaron Advincula type, say, and I don't hear his name quite this high. AJ Gracia, Sawyer Stroh-Snyder, Justin LeBron, Liam Peterson. I've heard the Diamondbacks tied to a lot of high school pitchers. I think that's probably more likely to be for their next pick at 31 than it is for 15. Although I do think if Gio Rojas made it to this range, they would be a team that I think would maybe kick the tires on that.
Yeah, the Diamondbacks, their most recent top overall picks, JJ, have been Kason Cunningham and Slade Caldwell. High school shortstop, high school outfielder. They took Ryan Waldschmidt, college outfielder, right after Caldwell, a couple picks later, and then Tommy Troy, Drew Jones before that. It does seem like they are a team that is, maybe the right opportunity comes up, somebody falls to them, and they do audible to, or maybe not audible is the right word, but they do go with a college pitching route. But it does seem like their tendency has been with their first pick to lean toward a hitter.
Yeah, you've got to go back basically, if you say from 2015 on, 2 pitchers with the first pick since 2015. So past performance does not guarantee future results, but it does offer indications.
Yeah, and I think if you're looking at Caldwell hasn't quite panned out, but if you're looking at like a Kason Cunningham who's done extremely well, yeah, I agree. That with that high contact bat, I think Jared Grindlinger fits that mold if he's available. I think I'm probably too soon for Aiden Ruiz, but just in terms of other high contact hitters, somebody like that would certainly fit that description as well. And they haven't shied away from smaller players like a Cunningham or Slade Caldwell before. I don't expect him to go that high, but he is somebody who at least fits into that that type of player. How about Texas Rangers? They're picking 16th this year.
Yeah, the Rangers are maybe one of the most interesting teams for me in this range because I've heard them associated with like almost exclusively high risk, high reward profiles. So college players like Justin LeBron, Sawyer Stroh-Snyder, Liam Peterson. This also felt like, and I'm not sure if it still is, given some of the news that we heard about and confirmed on the podcast, but Brody Bumila, who was one of the more outlier talents and risk profiles in this class, felt like that's where his traction maybe started. But we did hear that he has a UCL injury, a second one. So we'll have more on that on baseballamerica.com if you somehow haven't heard of it by the time you're hearing this podcast. But he does have another injury. I think that's going to really complicate his draft status. But I just think it's interesting that Texas is tied to so many of these profiles that I perceive as high risk, high reward. Whether or not that's an indication of like they want to take a big swing here, I'm not sure. But I've heard them associated with like every demographic in this range. And the LeBron one is interesting because he's another one where like I hear conflicting feedback about whether or not he's a realistic option for here. this feels like maybe a bit of a floor for Tyler Bell if he's still on the board at this pick. He makes a lot of sense, and that's also interesting just because he's the antithesis of that like high risk, high reward profile in my mind. He feels like a very safe, well-rounded college player that doesn't maybe have the same ceiling. So those are some of the names for. Yeah, go ahead.
Could I ask, like, when we were talking not that many weeks ago about Tyler Bell being like a surprise name at the very pretty high up at the very top of the draft? Does he feel like he's like, we talk about Justin LeBron having a wide range. Does Tyler Bell also have a pretty wide range of potential outcomes?
I don't think so. He gets kind of mentioned as like because the Rays were excited about him in high school. What if he's like a dark horse option? I don't really buy that one for their first pick. I don't hear his name pick up a ton of steam until about 7 or 8 or so. And then it sounds like he's off the board by 16. So like relative to some of these other players, I actually feel like his range feels more like Derek Curriel-ish. Whereas Justin LeBron, I could see him going 5. I could see him sliding into the early 20s. So maybe it's not like that much larger of a range. And I think probably
that's a big difference.
Like probably realistically, all of these players have bigger ranges than we think, just because it's hard to see what happens with the board. But yeah.
Justin LeBron feels like he would fit in on that, I don't know what year it was, but probably like 2013, 14 Hickory team that the Rangers had with like Lewis Brinson and Nomar Mazara and Jorge Alfaro and all these like really
and Joey Gallo.
Yeah, all these really tooled up guys with a lot of hit risk on them. That was a lot of fun to follow. I don't know how much. It yielded a lot of big leaguers at least. But the Astros pick next. They pick 17th overall. Then they also have the 28th overall pick this year. What are the? I mean, are we starting to maybe hear a little bit more pitching here, or is this another organization where you're hearing that maybe more bats are still coming?
I wouldn't be surprised if they took an arm. I think guys like Liam Peterson, maybe Mason Edwards, those could be potential fits in this range, both on talent and just given some of the pitchers they've taken in the past. I've heard college outfielders like Zion Rose. He could make sense. We haven't mentioned his name much at all in this podcast, but I do think he could fit in this sort of range, maybe even a little bit higher. Logan Hughes, I've heard mentioned for them. Feels like it'd be a little bit high for this pick in particular. Bo Lawrence on the high school hitting side, I think his name will start to be in play around this pick and in the next 10 or so. So I think really for both of the Astros' first picks, he could make sense. They pick at 27 and then they pick at 28. So those are some of the names. If Justin LeBron is still here, I would start to wonder like, okay, is this around his floor, late teens? This is another team that gets mentioned for him. And I think the fact that so many teams are mentioned for him maybe does speak to how wide his range is.
It seems like a lot of teams also looking at him just saying, wait, should we be on this? Like we weren't expecting to earlier.
I think that's exactly it. It's like, hey, we entered the year thinking no chance. We're picking the late teens. Justin LeBron is like a top 5 talent in the class. We're not going to have a chance at him. And then very quickly, when he started to struggle, teams were like, okay, we better go do some work. He might slide a little bit further. And then I think it's definitely a case of like, yeah, you're going to have scouts in your department who are pounding the table for this guy because they love the tools and athleticism. I'm sure you're going to have analysts who are like terrified of it because of his track record of hitting in conference. So I imagine Justin LeBron has given, or at least I hope, because I've been given a lot of headaches from trying to figure out Justin LeBron. I hope teams have had to deal with that as well. It's only fair.
All right. Well, then the Reds pick next. They pick 18th overall. Carlos, what's the kind of the buzz around this pick for the Reds?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of left-handed pitchers in particular, both high school and college.
All right, that's different than what you've been saying that for every other team so far.
Right, yeah, sorry. I'll create a little more interest here for the Reds. Left-handed pitching, so I think guys like Mason Edwards, Gio Rojas, if he's here, Logan Schmidt, Hunter Dietz is a name I've heard mentioned. College hitters like Sawyer Stroh-Snyder, I'm unsure of, would make a lot of sense on talent here. Trevor Condon maybe is like the most heavily linked player in this range. This also feels like something of a midpoint for Trevor Condon's market, or like the likely range for him to go. I have heard the Reds would be a team that's like intrigued by Justin LeBron if he's still available. But the Mason Edwards one is interesting, and I mentioned this in our recent mock draft on the site. I've heard him comp to Andrew Abbott, and obviously the Reds had a nice outcome by taking Andrew Abbott. So if they view some similarities there and he's actually on the board here, that one could be pretty interesting. This also feels like, I don't know if it's actually the floor, but it feels like it should be the floor for like a Ryder Helfrich if he's somehow still around.
JJ, you've covered the Reds farm system for a lot of years. For us, are there names?
Everyone's retired from the first team, and I mean, well retired from the first Reds list I did.
All right. Well, I'll let you say that and not me. Which, based on your deep history then of having covered the Reds, does that all sound right to you?
Yeah. The thing I will say with them is they've kind of sneakily done a good job of drafting this decade after doing a really poor job the previous decade. Chase Burns is obviously a W at this point. Like, you want him to stay healthy and keep doing it, but he's been one of the better pitchers in the National League, starting pitcher in the National League so far this year. But, you obviously throw a Sal Stewart in there, you throw a Rhett Lauder. They've had some guys kind of, even Matt McClain, gives you value, like as a guy who was a 2021 first rounder. So they actually have kind of they've had some really bad luck, injury luck with. If I'm them, I would run screaming from SEC pitchers, especially second tier SEC arms, the Ty Floyds, Hunter Hollands. They've had a lot of those guys get hurt. And
they've been tied to Brody Bumila, JJ. So how does that make you feel?
I was going to say, like, Brody Bumila, if you've had your second elbow injury on your elbow before you get out of high school, that's not a great demographic risk-wise to be in. That's a tough one.
Another pitcher who has some injury history I've heard them linked to is Carson Bullimon, whether that's for this pick or their next pick. So I think he's in the mix as well. You hear a lot of lefties with the Reds in general, with the teams I've mentioned for them. I think there's a couple other players I wanted to mention here as well. I mentioned, Caden Sorrell would be another name. I'll just link to them here. We can move on though.
The Guardians pick after them, 19th overall. They threw a little bit of an audible to us last year.
Yeah.
They picked Jace Laviolette, who is a very un-Guardians type of pick based on their recent track record. Based on how Jace Laviolette is doing this year, do you think they will go back to the more not contact oriented, but guys who do not have the same kind of contact questions that Jace Laviolette had? Carlos?
I think Sawyer Stroh-Snyder shares some of the pros and cons of a Jace Laviolette profile. I think Stroh-Snyder is a better athlete, but that is a player who offers more power than is typically associated with the Guardians and more hit risk than they're typically willing to take. And I have heard them connected to him. I've also heard them connected to Jared Grindlinger, who's like the model darling favorite, who is that super young, left-handed hitting, contact-oriented player. I've heard them tied to Logan Schmidt, left-handed pitcher, where I think his market really heats up right around this range. We haven't mentioned him quite as much. It's been Algio Rojas, but I think, especially after this Bumila news, I think Logan Schmidt should probably be the favorite to be the second left-handed high school pitcher off the board. I think Zion Rose makes a lot of sense for the Guardians with what they've done historically if they're not committed to just taking a lot more power. I think some sleeper picks here could be Connor Como, who's young for the class and hits a lot. I think Landon Tomei makes a lot of sense. I think James Clark could make a lot of sense on the college side. I think Ty Head could make a lot of sense. I think Owen Hull could make a lot of sense. And Ty Head, I would also say, is like maybe a sleeper pick for the Reds as well, who I failed to mention there. But those are a lot of names who feel like they could be Cleveland Guardian-ish. But again, I'm very curious to see if they're going to double down on just like more power, because that's just not a trait they seem to have selected for in the draft until last year.
A lot of the names you rattled off are left-handed bats, and I mean even Laviolette, right? Him, right. Bazana, Ralphie Velasquez, Chase DeLauder. It's a lot of left-handed hitters. It's true.
Yeah, I think the only one I mentioned who's not is Zion Rose, which is why I don't tend to think of him, but I have heard him connected there. But yeah, they like lefties maybe more than any team in the game, and I think their big league lineup is maybe more left-handed than anyone.
I've written about this. They are like 2 standard deviations beyond anyone else as far as their amount of switch hitters and lefty. They're okay with a switch hitter. They just don't want you to bat right-handed
right.
exclusively. They are averse to those players, it seems like almost. I will point out, by the way, they also took Nolan Schubart in L101, but like last year they were like, hey,
right.
we want to get some power into this org, so we're going to add some power in the and I would say both of those have had little troubles at times. They've had some ups and downs, but there is power there, and there's also some swing and miss.
The Red Sox, the Boston Red Sox, picked 20th overall this year. Carlos, not going the season has so far as Red Sox fans have been hoping. This year, what's coming in the draft that's going to give them reason to smile?
Well, if Jared Greidlinger's on the board, I would be really surprised if he lasted much longer than this. We've mentioned him kind of throughout the 10 to 20 to range. This feels like a bit of a floor for him. If he doesn't go here or to the Guardians, I'd be mildly surprised as you can really be for calling your shots in a mock this deep. I think the same is true of AJ Gracia. Like if AJ Gracia got here and if he's not off the board, that would be a little surprising to me as well. I've heard them on high school hitters, some of these split campy high school hitters who have high potential landing spots like a Bo Lowrance and a Taj Marchand, who not every team is on, but enough teams like them in this back half of the first round range that they should go. I've heard them with a lot of power-oriented arms as well. I've not heard them with Liam Peterson specifically, but I have heard them with Hunter Dietz. I have heard them with Cole Carlone. They seem to like power, fastball stuff, big breaking balls. So any pitcher on the board in this range that fits those categories, I think could make sense. I also think just given how we expect the board to go after this Red Sox pick and maybe at this Red Sox pick, we could see a run of college arms, maybe with the exception of the Padres and Tigers who are picking right behind the Red Sox. They're very high school oriented clubs.
It also seems like the last few years, the Red Sox have drafted somebody who we had ranked higher than where they actually ended up going. Somebody who we thought maybe would go earlier in the draft and ended up, I don't say maybe falling, but getting to them that, hey, maybe we didn't expect them to be here based on where we had them ranked before, right? So
yeah, they did that multiple years.
Last year it was Kyson Witherspoon. The year before that it was Braden Montgomery, and Montgomery had been hurt, so maybe that played a factor into it. The year before they drafted Kyle Teal. Is there somebody, I guess for either of you guys, is there somebody where, I don't know, I guess
boom, we found the Justin LeBron landing spot.
I'm not sure how you can predict a surprise. Like by definition, it will surprise you. But are there guys who are candidates other than LeBron, obviously, who could be ranked top 10, top 12, where you're like, oh, we didn't think this guy was going to be available, and he ends up getting to the Red Sox?
The two I'm looking at are Chris Akopian and Ace Reese. We've got them ranked 11 and 12. We've said enough other players, and I haven't heard teams who have them at the very top of the board to where if it goes a certain way, I could see both those bats being available. And if you're the Red Sox, maybe you're like, hey, Chris Akopian, maybe the best hit power combination in the class overall. If you wanted to make the case, you could. And then Ace Reese, who maybe has the most present game power of any of the players that we're talking about, his ability to barrel the baseball at ideal angles. Those would be two interesting ones. Sawyer Stroh-Snyder, I think it's more likely that he actually does get into the 20s, so it'd be less of a surprise, just given his kind of stock as we go down the stretch. Those are two for me. How about you, JJ? Any jump out to you?
I mean, I kind of think in this range, it's getting this is where it gets really tough for me, because I don't envy your job, right? And what I would say about that is I don't envy your job, because at this point, you've touched on this, but I feel like if you asked me right now, said, okay, you get to have picks 20 through 25 in this draft, and you give me picks 35 through 40, I don't need much odds to feel like that my picks could end up being better than you did. Not my picks, but the picks at 35 to 40 end up being pretty similar to 20 to 25. It shouldn't work that way. It should have a stair step down, but we keep talking about this is a class where I feel like the flaws of the players you're talking about here, the concerns, aren't that different from the concerns of the guys who we're talking about in the 30s to 40s and maybe even the start of the 50s. And that's where I'm having a real trouble with this is there's not a lot of guys in this range that I really like for this range. I may like them, but when you mention some of these names, the high school arms, the high school bats who are likely to go in that 30 to 40 range, some of the college guys who are expected to go in the 30, 40, 50 range. If you told me that one of those second or third tier catchers ends up being as good as these guys we're talking about here, I don't know which one. Maybe it's Jack Natalie. Maybe it's, Natali, I should say. Maybe it's Daniel Jackson. Maybe it's Carson Tinney. But I believe that one of them very well could. If you told me that Owen Hull, who's not going to hear his name called for quite a while here, but his hitting ability means that he ends up being a better kind of center field, college out center field type than the guys we're talking about this range, I don't think it's crazy because it does feel like this is the range where the separation gets really narrow.
Yep.
We have the Padres picking next, 21st overall. And Carlos, the Padres have not taken a college player with their first pick since 1973 or thereabouts, I believe. And they certainly like their lefties, Cruz Schoolcraft last year, Cash Mayfield, a lot of big physical players as well. I don't want to hear any college names here, I assume. So what is it going to be? Logan Schmidt with a left-hander from California, which is it going to be Coleman Borthwick, big physical arm from Florida? Tell me which high school player they're taking.
Well, you kind of did a great summary of their pick, Ben. I think you could take that and run with it, and you'd be good to go. I do think Schmidt and Borthwick make a lot of sense. I think any of the top high school players on the board like this, because of the Padres' tendencies and track record, it does feel like both Jared Greinlinger, Trevor Condon, if they're on the board here, like they're real risks to go. Bo Lawrence makes a lot of sense for the Padres. I've heard them connected with him in particular and on talent in this range. Brody Bumila was mocked to the Padres and speculated for the Padres by basically everybody in the industry for the entirety of the spring. Whether or not the news of his recent injury takes him out of this conversation, it wouldn't surprise me if it did. Any of the high school pitchers on the board make a lot of sense. I think you could also start thinking about high school shortstops we have ranked further down the board. Guys like Tyler Spangler, Aiden Ruiz could make a lot of sense. I think players like Landon Tomei could make a lot of sense. I think players like Archer Horn could make some sense. I haven't heard James Clark in particular with the Padres, but he's kind of in that same tier of players. I think there are some reasons why I wouldn't think James Clark for them. For the Padres, like speculatively, I wonder why they wouldn't be a fit for players like Justin LeBron and Sawyer Strohsnyder. They are college players, yes, but they fit the sort of like high upside tools and athleticism profile the Padres seem to target. And so while those players will be unlikely to be the name I have for them in the final mock, I do kind of always wonder, like, why wouldn't they be a good exit point for either of them if they got there, just given their tendencies overall, if you just strip out like the pure demographic? Because in some ways, LeBron and Strohsnyder feel to me more like high school profile players.
Carlos is talking crazy, right, JJ? It's got to be high school player, right?
Well, I will say with the Padres, the other thing about the Padres is the Padres also are they're a team that is very happy to take a guy here to save money to take a guy later. So the Padres, I feel like, are a team that often the first pick they have is not the guy who gets the largest bonus in their class. So if you heard something like that, it would probably, to me, mean they've got something cooking later on, because I always go back to Hudson Potts getting $1 million in a class where, like, I think that was the James Wood class, and like James Wood went later, but James Wood got a lot bigger bonus than him. They've done that, I believe, a number of times. So they're also like, if they take someone here, it may be because they've got someone else an idea for someone else down the road.
I like
Jensen Hirschkorn here as well.
Ooh, that's a good one.
I think makes a lot of sense.
He fits. He's big enough, I think. 6'7", right-handed pitcher from California.
I would be sad if I had forgotten to mention Jensen Hirschkorn. I think that's a real possibility for the Padres.
I like that you mentioned Tyler Spangler too for the first time. I think on talent he fits here. I actually think on talent he fits even higher. And the Padres are not afraid to say, "Hey, we like this guy more than other teams, or we're more willing to take on risk than other teams." And Tyler Spangler basically didn't play this year. But before that, he was right up there, right behind, or maybe maybe right behind Grady Emerson or right alongside Jacob Lombard in that conversation for the next best high school player in the class. 6'3", left-handed hitting shortstop, really smooth swing, just good actions at the plate. I think in the field too. I'm very intrigued to see what ends up happening with Tyler Spangler.
Yeah, he's maybe one of the hardest players in this class to predict, just given the lack of playing time he had this spring. But I think on talent, I'm right there with you, Ben.
Well, I know the Tigers are going to draft some left-handed hitter because they did that last year with Jordan Yost, and then actually their next pick too, Michael Oliveto, Bryce Rayner, Max Clark. Kevin McGonigal has had some early success so far in his career, I would say. Are you hearing more left-handed bats for the Tigers, or is this the range where maybe, there actually are some more appealing college pitching opening up in this range?
Yeah, the Tigers are honestly becoming a bit like the Padres and Guardians in that they very much have a type that they get associated with frequently.
You like that, right?
And for the Tigers, I love it. Yeah, give me more. We need more of those teams, and we'll get 100% success rate on this mock. The Tigers are associated with basically every left-handed hitting high school player you could think of in this class. I also think they are one of the most likely landing spots inside the first round for Aiden Ruiz, who's a shortstop out of New York. We haven't mentioned his name too much. I think this is kind of the high. I don't know if it definitely is, but this is one of the earlier teams we hear with Aiden Ruiz, who maybe is the best defensive player in the class. I think other offensive-oriented high school players like a Colt Prosek could make some sense here. Bo Lowrance is mentioned here. Again, I mentioned this for the Padres, but either of Trevor Connon and Jared Granglinger, if either of these players are off the board after the Tigers pick, it would be very surprising to me. And then I think you're talking about other players like Tomei, Connor Como would actually make a ton of sense to me with the Tigers. I think I'll just iterate for the Tigers here, or just highlight here. I think the Tigers are one of the teams who, like, they don't care at all what the consensus is. They're going to take the guy they like, and they don't really mind. I don't think they're too worried about like making a risky pick. They're going to line up players. They're happy to take high school players. And I would expect a high school bat here probably.
Does that ring true for you, JJ?
Yeah. I mean, like, I like how Carlos said it. They're going to take the guys they like, and they're good with that. Like, I felt like Jordan Yost is an example of that. Like, if they believe in a guy, they're going to take him. I would say that, they believed in Kevin McGonigal. They're going to take him. I would say that also with that, I feel like in general, their MO is to take, I know that you could argue a couple of these guys, but like generally I would say that they prefer guys who can hit and develop the power to guys who have power. Yeah. They want bat to ball skills. And again, like I think you said, left-handed hitters who can play valuable up the middle positions, especially we'll take your shortstops. I feel like they kind of zigged. They were the Colt Keiths of the world like 5, 6, 7 years ago, where it's like, I felt like there was a time where the Tigers were stacking up the Justin Henry Malloys, the Colt Keiths, the Youngs, like the guys who you're like, this guy can hit. We'll figure out where he can play defensively. And they kind of found in a lot of those cases, they couldn't find out where they play defensively. And then they've gone to the guys who these guys can hit, and we know that they will be valuable somewhere defensively.
Yeah, a lot of those names you mentioned kind of check those boxes, I think, for the Tigers. Ruiz, certainly, obviously, Condon, if he's still available. Prosek, maybe a little less, although it depends where Prosek ends up. Does he catch? I don't know. He's played some shortstop. I don't think that's really a long-term home for him. But yeah, Bo Lawrence, big left-handed hitting bat. None of those guys would surprise me if they ended up going to Detroit. But what about the Cubs? The Cubs picking 23rd overall last year, their first round pick, Ethan Conrad, who big fan of Ethan Conrad, really like the pick. Would love to see him more on the field than he has been so far, other than in Arizona for about 3 minutes. What are you hearing for the Cubs this year? Carlos, it's been very college heavy, sir, obviously in recent years.
Yeah, I've heard them with a lot of college players, college pitchers in particular, actually, for the Cubs. I've heard them associated with pitching on the high school demographic as well. Logan Schmidt in particular, I've heard that they've been all over. So I wonder if this is a potential landing spot for him. I've heard them associated with Mason Edwards. I think they should be like in the mix for basically the entirety of the second tier of college pitching options, which includes Tegan Coons out of Tennessee, which includes Taylor Rabe at Ole Miss. Maybe that includes guys like Cole Carlone, Hunter Dietz, Jack Riddell. If players like Cameron Flukie and Liam Peterson are still on the board, either of those players I think make a lot of sense. As we've gone through this, one thing that stood out to me is like potential homes for both Flukie and Peterson. I could see a scenario where one or both of those players get into the 20s. And if they do, I think the Cubs and a number of teams in this range and behind will be pretty excited about the talent they're
They'll
getting.
be throwing a party.
Yeah, relative to like the expectations preseason.
Would you be excited if you were the Cubs, JJ, about getting either Peterson or Flukie there, or is there a reason? I think particularly for me at least, particularly in Flukie's case, where okay, yeah, he was great last year. He got hurt this year. It wasn't surgery, so that's a good thing. He did come back, but like he didn't come out and then just dominate. So are you buying low, or is this a falling knife that you're catching potentially?
There's a balance, but I think that you do look at it. I would in general say if you're getting someone who in both those cases, the flaws or the potential flaws that have been exposed are not something where, oh, we were wrong about this player. Like, okay, to take it a comparison to a guy we talked about a lot in this, Justin LeBron, right? In Justin LeBron's case, if you take him high, or if you take him here and you say, we never imagined that he would get to here, you're doing so saying the concern that held us back coming into the season is exactly the same concern that holds us back now, the reason he fell to us, which is he just hasn't hit at the level we expect him to hit. In the case of Flukie, you have to dive into the medicals and all, but you could absolutely say that the reason he fell to us now is not that there's some aspect of what we thought with him was true last year is not true anymore. It's that we never got to see it this year because he had an injury derailed season. And so, hey, we're getting a little bit of a buy low candidate here, but not with something that we've discovered a new flaw. Jay Laviolette last year, we talk about fell to the back of the first round. That was because, hey, we thought his hit tool was here coming into the year. Actually, it's probably more like here. So he fell for a flaw being discovered. I don't know if Cam Flukie has a flaw being discovered. Liam Peterson, you could say, is a little bit more to me in that LeBron camp where it's like the same problem that we worried about coming into the year is still the same problem we have now. In Flukie's case, it's like we just didn't get to see him pitch this year like we did last year. That to me is a little bit different, but that may just be my perception.
The Mariners now picking 24th overall. They've picked all types of guys in recent years, Carlos. Obviously, Cade Anderson looks phenomenal right now. Before that, their top picks, Jarangelo Sanchez, Colt Emerson, Cole Young. We talked a lot about college pitching for some of these teams in recent picks, certainly a lot more so than the top of the board. Do you think that holds true here for Seattle too?
I think it could. I think it could wind up being the case where like just the best players available happen to be college arms because of the run on hitters in front of them. I don't think that they're like not into some hitters. Some names I've heard them associated with are Zion Rose and Taj Marchand in particular. Like this is maybe one of the more likely landing spots for me for Taj Marchand and Bo Lawrence. I think both those players, like they start to get a lot of real attention here on the board. And then I think any of the college pitchers who would get taken here should be excited because the Mariners have been a tremendous pitching factory and pitching development team. Tegan Kuhns, Liam Peterson, Cameron Flukie, Taylor Rabe, all those players make a ton of sense here. I'm trying to see if there are any other names that I've not mentioned yet who maybe could start to come and play more on the board in this range. I do think like college outfielders like Caden Sorrell and Aiden Robbins maybe start to get more in play here. Guys like Daniel Jackson, Jarena Advincula on the college side maybe start to get more attention in this range. Jack Riddell is another pitcher that I'll throw out and mention. Cade Townsend would be another pitcher that fits in that demographic. So if they wanted to continue being open-minded to demographics, I think they'll have no shortage of opportunities that make sense on talent here.
Well, the Milwaukee Brewers picking at 25. They have no shortage of talented prospects in their organization.
What do you give the team that has everything?
Yeah, and it's not like they've knocked it out of the park with all of their first round picks. I mean, Andrew Fisher has been good so far. I mean, huge power, obviously with a big strikeout rate too, but he looks really good. Braylon Payne, not a consensus first rounder. He's been another top one or has been a top 100 prospect. But Brock Wilken before that, Eric Brown Jr. So a bit of a mixed track record there. But obviously, they're just a combination of everybody they've drafted throughout the draft, and then obviously, they've done all right internationally, signing guys like Jesus Made, Luis Pena. Obviously, Jackson Churio is since graduated. Now Alexander Frias looks like the next big rising international star for them. But what are you hearing here for Milwaukee, Carlos?
Cole Prosek out of Mississippi is one of the names I've heard most heavily associated with the Brewers. I also feel like the Brewers just generally seem to be a team that is very willing to take these college profiles that slide a bit further than we think. So I just wonder, are they maybe a hard stopping point for players like Justin LeBron or Sawyer Stroh-Snyder, who maybe teams just get a little bit scared of, and the Brewers are like, hey, we'll take them, we'll take the tools, we'll take on the risk. They did this with Garrett Mitchell. They've done this in the past with a number of different kind of profiles. They feel, you've mentioned it before, they always feel like a more likely team to do bats early and then arms later. Definitely. So I would expect that to remain the case for them. And I think they could have options on both the high school and college side here. They also seem to be willing to take either of those with their first overall pick. Yeah,
bats early and then either arms later, or just we'll get some arm off the, that some other team doesn't want. We'll trade for them and turn them into a monster.
How about a premium prospect who seems like they just can't figure it out? And I think that it'll take us about a minute and a half to figure it out for them and put them in a rotation. Kyle Harrison, Quinn Priester, we could go down the list.
All right. Well, we've gone over the first 25 picks, but we don't want to leave you guys hanging if you're a fan of the Mets, the Yankees, the Phillies, the Blue Jays, or Dodgers. So we're going to cover each of these teams' top picks, starting with the Mets. 27 overall, they pick, Carlos. Obviously, when we're getting this deep into the draft, it's hard to get a lot of precision on who's going to be the pick for the Mets. But what kind of intel are you hearing with them?
The two players I've heard mostly with them, like most strongly with them, are Bo Lowrance and Aiden Robbins. What's interesting about Bo Lowrance is I think this makes a lot of sense for him in terms of talent and range of the board. But because of like my perception of his asking price, how much of a tough sign he might be, it almost feels more unlikely for him to go to the Mets because there are just going to be other teams picking on either side of this pick who have more money to offer. So I wonder if that comes into play. On the college side, Aiden Robbins is a name I've heard a lot recently with the Mets. So I wonder if he's a fit. I think Tegan Kuhns could be another potential option as well. So those are a few. I don't know if you guys get a sense of like what you think the Mets tend to covet. They've had some changes in the front office over the years. Certainly the big league team is not performing at the level they'd like. So I'm not sure if any of that impacts what you think they might do, but those are some of the names that I've heard with them.
Okay, I'll just throw out one thing that I do feel like we've seen as a recent trend with them is the two-way guy who then they focus on one thing. The Mitch Voigts, the Nolan McLeans, the guys like that. Is there someone
Carson Bench too? Yeah.
Carson Bench too. Yeah.
Archer Horn on the high school side, Cole Koniger on the high school side, Evan Dempsey at Florida Gulf Coast. Those would all be like two-way players who maybe are like more exciting on one side or the other, but those are the top guys who I would expect to actually get here, who make sense. So potentially them.
I would say with Voigt and Carson Bench too, you're looking at guys who look, David Stearns was in Milwaukee, kind of the same thing, guys who make a lot of contact, who make good swing decisions. So I would expect if they go the hitter, somebody, whether it's high school or college side, to kind of fit that mold for them.
Yeah, high contact options in this range that I feel like could be available would include Tyler Spangler, Aiden Ruiz, Jared Vincula, Cole Prosek would make some sense. Those would be some of the first names that come to mind. Maybe Eric Becker, although I don't hear his name too much in this range.
The Yankees, they have the 35th overall pick. Carlos, what are you expecting from the Yankees this year? It seemed like last year they went up and drafted Dax Kilby right around this range, right? 39 overall, higher than maybe a lot of people were expecting him to go. Went out, had a great debut, just hasn't really been able to get on the field this year. Is there a chance they go kind of not totally off the board? I wouldn't say it was totally off the board, but maybe go a little bit higher than other people go or on a player. What are you hearing about them?
Yeah, I feel like the Yankees for a few years had we had a really good read on them, despite the fact that they're picking so low. A couple of the players I've heard them linked to really heavily recently are Brody B. Mila, who again, how does his injury situation change that? Not sure. Bo Lowrance. That's those two I've heard associated a lot with him. I've heard more high school and like high variance profiles tied to the Yankees. Whether or not like that's the direction they decide to go, I think would be interesting. In this range, we're getting into like full speculation territory, I'd say, and also the ability to sign the players you might want starts to become more of a factor as well. Some other names who could fit: Eric Becker, I think, for later. Yeah, we're starting to get to the range where I don't feel as confident, and maybe that started like 10 picks ago.
Do you think Aiden Ruiz, high school shortstop from
He's another
New
good
York,
one. Yeah.
could be in this mix? They've taken, whatever Yankees are feeling about him now, but like Anthony Volpe, they've had a lot of success.
He feels very
with-
Anthony Volpe-ish, right?
I wouldn't say that, but I just more mean in terms of like they signed a lot of good Northeast players. Whatever you think of Volpe now, I get it, but like Schlittler, Ben Rice, he's been on the Yankees area code team. Not that that makes a huge difference, but for the last 2 years, it would not surprise me, I guess, if they ended up with him, if he's even available and doesn't go 10, 15 picks, maybe even earlier.
I think that could make a lot of sense too. Joe Toroli is a name I've heard mentioned with them, but I think that's for later. I don't think that's for this pick. That would be really way off the board.
That would be a shocker at this spot.
Yeah.
How about 36 Philadelphia Phillies? Obviously picking pretty late, hard to narrow it down, but what kind of names or what types of stuff are you hearing with them?
I feel like the Phillies tend to take like hitters with big tools and pitchers with big stuff, and maybe they're more willing to take shots on players who have some hit risk or some missed questions or some control questions. That feels to be the sorts of profiles they've taken. And I have heard them linked to a couple position players who fit those sorts of profiles on the college side. Caden Sorrell, I think, is a player who could be available here, who has this really exciting power speed combination, but comes with some missed questions that you're going to have to tolerate. And then on the high school side, again, I'm not sure if it's for this pick or if it's for later. It's hard for me to get a sense of like where Rocco Maniscalco is going to go, because he's extremely young. He has great physical tools. He's a great defender at shortstop. But there are real hit questions with him. So those are two players who maybe if you're a Phillies fan and you don't want swing and miss players, you're not happy to hear that. But I think both have like really exciting upside, and they're names that I've heard for this range.
How about the Blue Jays picking a few picks later? They pick 39th overall. They don't, if you just look at their top picks like JoJo Parker, Trey Savage, Arjun Namala. I think they were fortunate or excited to have Trey Savage fall to them that year. But JoJo Parker, Arjun Namala, two very different types of players. What do you think they're going to be looking at with this pick, Carlos?
I think the Blue Jays really like young players. I think a lot of the players they've taken have been young for the class. I feel like they're associated with those profiles a lot. So whether that's like a Connor Como type on the high school side, I think they could be all over a lot of different high school hitters. Bo Lawrence is another name. Will Adams is a name I've heard for them. I think Will Adams is not a name we're going to hear much in this top 40-ish range, but like second or third round, I think he's a hitter who could make a lot of sense. Let's see, who did I have them mocked to previously? Archer Horn, I think, could make some sense in this range. I feel like more specifically
would that be as a two-way, or would that be as a position player?
I think he has real upside on both, so I think he would be selected as a two-way player. I think Archer Horn, James Clark would be another name I would mention for the Blue Jays that can make sense in this range. Those are two high school players. Landon Tomei is another name who can make some sense.
These guys seem to fit. I know that Arjun Namala and JoJo Parker are kind of very different kind of players, but I feel like those players both fit. If you say that they do like their prep shortstops who can hit, that these guys all fit within that continuum.
Right. Yeah. So those would be some
prep shortstops who can hit, and we'll figure out if they're shortstops or second basemen or outfielders, and that's somewhat down the road.
Yep. Taj Marchand is around. I think Toronto might be a team on him, but he could be off the board.
All right. We will finish with the Dodgers picking 40th overall. Are they gonna? I know they need a lot of help in the outfield right now, Carlos. They got
Just sad.
yeah, like Sirota, DePaula, Quintero, Hope, like Kendall George is just like another guy in that mix for them. What are you thinking they're going to go this year?
They're probably going to take a player who 15 teams in front of them wish they took like a year from now. It seems to be what the Dodgers do every year. I've heard them connected to a lot of different profiles. James Clark, Eric Becker, Aiden Ruiz, Bo Lorance, Caden Sorrell, Colt Prosek. Like, I don't feel like the Dodgers have a particular type. They seem willing to go to a bunch of different demographics. They seem willing to take risk on athletes at times. Other times they go for these like more college performer types. So I think the Dodgers, you can't pin down to a specific demographic, but those are some of the names I hear associated with them. Let me just make sure I'm not missing over any. No, I think those are some. I would be really interested with them and Eric Becker, because I have talked to some scouts who like specifically were like, hey, it would be so annoying for the Dodgers to get Eric Becker, because they would turn him into a player that like was the guy who everyone had inside the first round entering the year. And I would be curious like what they're able to get out of him.
Can I just add to this kind of your point that you're making here? So the Dodgers in 2021 had one pick in the top 100 picks, right? And Maddox Bruns has not turned out so far. But so what did they do? They got Emmett Sheehan, Bing Kasparius, and Justin Robleski, all of them with picks that were after pick 150. And you're like, okay, it's good. Well done. You did that. Okay, so the next year they had one pick in the top 100 again, pick 40. They got Dalton Rushing there, and they got Alex Freeland at pick 105. So then you say, okay, the next year they did have 3 picks in the top 100 that year. That one does not look as Kendall George, you just mentioned, was pick 36. But I will say that draft does not have the slew of guys who you're like, oh, that guy's already a stud. But then they got Chase Harlan at pick 98, which was one of their only 2 picks in the top 100 the year after that. He's kind of a fringe he's not in the 100, but he's not that far off. Then Zach Root at 40 and Charles Davalon at 41. Davalon's on our top 100 now, and Zach Root's not far off of it. Cam Leiter's now coming back at they got it pick 65. Yes, they do a great job of, hey, tie one arm behind our back. Don't worry, we'll figure out a way to get talent out of it.
Yep.
Well, the Dodgers, they don't have a second round pick. They don't have a third round pick this year. They don't pick again until the 4th round, and obviously the back of the 4th round. So they pick at 40, and then they pick again at 132. What does that do for your strategy? It seems like you're pretty limited in what you can.
It really limits you. I mean, they have $3.95 million in total bonus pool to spend, so it should be a little over $4 million if they go to the 5% overage, which they regularly do. The next lowest bonus pool in this class is the Blue Jays with 5.5. So both the pick capital and the like actual money to spend, the Dodgers are as limited as we've ever seen a team in recent years. I spoke with the Dodgers specifically for a story on like how you even prepare for that, how you adjust your draft strategy for that. And I think the Dodgers are going to continue to operate as normal. They're going to line up their board. They're going to take the players that they see as the best on their board, who they're able to sign. Obviously, you got to have that element in there. But the Dodgers routinely get value despite having no pick capital, and it wouldn't surprise me at all for them to continue to do so.
All right. Well, that was a good rehearsal. I'm gonna hit record now, guys, and we're gonna record the real. No, that was.
You and JJ have fun. You and JJ have fun.
All right. Well, we will look back, Carlos, and make sure to see if you got all of these picks right. I like that you threw out no. I mean, the truth is, you must have like a good feel for what probably could happen at the top of the draft, and then it's like one team at 4 and then one team at 6 takes some guy off the board on an underslot deal or does something unexpected. I think every other team changes. It just changes what you're going to do going forward. So even the teams themselves, once you're picking, even probably starting at number 2, but especially at 4, 5, 6, you don't really know exactly who's going to be available there. So I like that you have the information out there to be like, okay, look, these are the types of players, or these are the players potentially who would be in consideration. And then, hey, depending on which path down the maze other teams ahead of them go, these are the guys that could be in play here.
Right. I like that. You go ahead, JJ.
I just want to make a point with that. Again, we love mocks. So we know that you all more than us love mocks. At the same time, and I'm not a gambler, but a mock draft in some way is like a 30-leg parlay where you're like, because if you get pick one wrong, even if it's like, well, I think pick one is 55, 45X, 55X, 45Y, and it ends up being the 45% outcome. Well, that means you're almost guaranteed to get pick two wrong, and then it's going to cascade down. And I say this, like Carlos, there's been years where Carlos had the most accurate mock draft out there, but to this point is a very vital one, which is you're trying to share the information of these are the players in consideration, and whether the final pick ends up being the exact one that it ends up being is useful, is fun, but it also means like you could be bang on all your information and no one basically BS'd you in any way where we didn't, we got great information on all this. And again, that's an impossible with 30 plus picks. But even if you did, all that has to happen, and I will say, credit to Jim Callis. I know it was a simpler time, but the one where he went 18 for 18 will forever
2005, yeah.
mind, because of this exact thing, which is once you start getting a couple wrong, they don't affect every pick after it, but they affect a lot of them, because if a Justin LeBron goes 6 rather than 18, it's going to cascade down to affect a lot of picks in between. Or if, we say, okay, we think that there's tiers, but one of these guys who we don't feel is that top tier goes 4, that means that one of the picks that we thought was going to be gone by pick 5 goes 5, and then it all cascades.
What I was going to say is like, I feel like I appreciate that our mock drafts provide a lot of value to you if you actually read the mock drafts. And what I mean by that is like, there's a lot of information that I feel like is going to be relevant to helping you understand what's going to happen on draft day, even if the exact picks, like you guys mentioned, aren't right. But a year ago, we had a lot of people acting like Eli Willits was a shocker at number 1, or that Tyler Bremner wasn't a completely off the board selection at number 2. And I feel like I will feel good about the mock if we can generally steer you and say like, hey, this is what we're hearing, and if this information is correct, and if you can like react to what's happening on draft day, and you're like, okay, this makes sense. Like that's when I feel like, okay, I did an okay job with the mock. And at the same time, I do think it's worth reiterating that like the teams themselves do not know who they're taking or who's going to be available to them. So it is an exercise in futility in some ways. But yeah, we're obviously trying to do the best we can to line them up.
And add in though also the thing we talked about also here, which is that, okay, so we're also trying to do, like, if you look at our rankings, okay, if you see someone go 28, who we have 45 on our board, I know that the tendency there is to say, oh, they, took a big swing, what are they doing? Or on flip side, if someone who we have 15 goes 28, you kind of have to wait till after they're signed and see what the bonuses are, because the guy who goes 15 may end up signing for 1.5 million less than the guy who goes 34. And you could say, well, why did he go that late? It's because he had a number and the teams at 16, 17, 18, and 20 were like, nope, we're not doing that. But there was a team who had more money that they could spend. And they're like, hey, and by the way, to remind, I can't imagine someone's this far in and doesn't know this, but just in case, that doesn't mean that teams picking 19, 20, 21 are cheap. It's not because they're trying to save on the bonus. It's because they don't have the same bonus pool allotment. So this is not something where talent just lines up and goes off the board in descending order from 1 to 500.
Yeah, as the guy who writes up our live analysis post of every first round pick the night of the draft, I definitely feel that on needing to wait to see, like, okay, how are they actually paying this guy? Are they getting better players, with their later picks? So that is very much true. But I know, go ahead.
I just want to add one thing with that also is that, like, I do think we also said, like, we try to, when we're doing this, when we're covering the draft, we're not trying to pull punches, but the reason we don't go hot takey is you have to have some intellectual humility in doing this, in that the teams, we work as hard as we can year round. I'm looking at two guys who basically bust it all the time to try to help us make these rankings as good as they can be. But if a team takes a guy that we thought was 82 and they take him at 28, when a team takes Evan Carter, our initial reaction is not this team's an idiot. Our reaction is, did they know something we don't know? Because in general, a team who has a lot more resources to throw this than we do may know something that we don't know. And then we're going to dig to try to see, well, what do they know? Doesn't mean that teams don't get picks wrong. And we'll tell you, which teams bombed the draft later on and all that. But on draft day, you're not going to hear a lot from us of that's just an idiotic pick, because you kind of always want to know, well, what did they know? What do they know that we don't? Sometimes it's not, but a lot of times it is, because they've got a little bit of an extra insight, because there are a lot of scouts out there. There are a lot of people who spend their entire lives doing this. And sometimes they pull something out that other people don't know.
Well, most of you guys probably just pulled up the timestamps, went to your favorite team and listened to that section. But if you guys are listening after 2+ hours of all of this discussion, we would definitely want to thank you. We would appreciate any glowing reviews, whatever you want to listen to and rate your podcast. So, but we definitely thank you, and we just thank you guys for paying attention all year. And really, we cover this 2026 class going back multiple years. So it's been certainly, especially on the high school side for me, a lot of fun to cover. I'm just looking forward to getting it across the finish line and seeing what actually happens now on the draft. So thank you guys for listening. For Carlos, for JJ, thank you guys so much.